Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not a politician. I'm a businessman with a sense of history, and I'm also a Londoner. And today is a day of great historical significance for London. Our country's not an island anymore. We're a leading European state. Yes. And I believe that this is the decade in which London will become Europe's capital.
The EscapeGoat podcast. A podcast series featuring the discussion of many different topics, flaws and all, based on personal whims and fascinations. Hosted by me, David Fagiani, and several different guests. Welcome back to the EscapeGoat podcast, the first one that we're releasing this year in 2024. And I'd like to welcome back two gentlemen to the show. They've worked together many times. They've never been on the show together, but they've both been on the show separately. I'd like to welcome back Kit. Hello, Kit.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm great. Good. I'm looking forward to chatting to both of you tonight. And the other gentleman here tonight is James. Hi, James.
He has risen.
he certainly has.
Yeah, that's what the Catholics say every time. Shaking each other's hands. He has risen. He certainly has.
It's good to know where you are. That's set the tone rather well, actually, I think. Firstly, Kit, how are you? How have you been?
Yeah, not too bad. It's been, I'm trying to, remind me, when's the last time we spoke on when was the last EscapeGoat? When's the last time your audience heard me talking?
That was, last EscapeGoat, I think, was the start of last year, 2023. Right. But I think we've done a bit of talking since then on other channels.
Sure. So, but I'm trying to think like in terms of subject matter. So that would have been.
Well, my Life in Horror was going on. You know, that's.
Is it My Life in Horror Volume 2 chat?
That was a great chat. Really good talk. That was.
Thank you. Yeah, one or two. What's happened since then? One or two things. I mean, I've finished writing My Life in Horror for starters. It's obviously a pretty major one. Yeah, I'm not doing too badly, I think. I just, in the last sort of month or so, I just got a novella draft finished. I mean, in between that conversation and this one, obviously, I lost my father, which was unfortunate. I don't mean I lost him, I mean, he died. I don't mean I can't find him down the back of the sofa or something. But that was, and I've sort of been dealing with various things related to that since then, including a book of his that I've been trying to get finished, which I've had some very good news about in the last couple of weeks. So that's good. So yeah, I mean, stuff's been happening, my man. Stuff has been happening, but we persist. And certainly it was, that was obviously a difficult period, but one of the great joys of it was getting to sit down with you and James and watching the movie that we're going to discuss tonight. It was a huge highlight of a very difficult time. So yeah, I'm very grateful to be back, and I'm particularly grateful for the subject that we'll be talking about.
I appreciate that, Kit. And yeah, I might make references back to that weekend in question, actually, just before, I think it was early December, wasn't it? Yeah. We were in Milton Keynes watching that together, and we have rewatched it since. I'm here to talk about it. James, how are you?
Yeah, I'm very, very well indeed. Thank you, David. Nice bit of personal news. After a lot of hard work yesterday, passed my theory test. So that was good. I was happy about that. And then today has been naps and walks to the pub, and reading as well, because I stopped myself from reading. I put a moratorium on it whilst I was studying for the theory test, just as a way to motivate myself. So yeah, from yesterday and today, I said to Kit earlier, it's been like the end of cigarettes and alcohol and rollerblading, where I'm like reading 8 books at once.
It's just off camera. It's a giant hypodermic needle with War and Peace in it, which he's just about to stab into his veins.
That's superb. Oh, well done, mate. That's great.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah. I'll be needing some lifts very soon.
Yeah.
So that works out well.
Yeah.
Good timing. How are yourself?
I am good. I'm good, thanks. Yeah, I've had a nice day today. I went for a nice relaxed lunch in the environs of South London. Bit of a walk around. Had a few pints earlier, which I don't normally do before podcasts, but I think I've leveled out now with a tea. So that's good.
Did you go around Waterloo checking out all of its potential for, regeneration?
Yeah, sure, I did. Yeah, I was scoping out some docks that could do with a bit of investment from our American cousins. I know. Actually, I was for part of it. I was actually down back in Bermondsey, like very near Tower Bridge, which is kind of where I was when I was, I think, initially talking to you guys about this last year, and down not too far away from St Catherine's Docks, and those parts of South London and the river, which feature a lot in the movie we're going to be discussing. I went to the theatre last night, which is a fairly occasional thing for me, but it was a late birthday present from John that I do the Inside Number 9 podcast with, and we went to I keep forgetting the name of it, but we went to see a play that's just finished in London, actually, that's been quite big, which is play about John Gielgud and Richard Burton.
Yes, yeah. I know the one.
Did the adverts for it? Yeah, so Mark Gatiss playing John Gielgud, and some bloke, I forget his name, playing Burton. And
it wasn't McNulty, was it? I remember it. No, he played Burton in something else. Excuse me.
That makes sense. I could see that would work. Yeah. Then the actress Tuppence Middleton, who I think I only knew through her ridiculous name and maybe like a Black Mirror appearance before, she's Liz Taylor in it, which is kind of cool. Nice. But I really enjoyed it. It was kind of, I was talking to John about watching Gatiss act as this kind of as John Gielgud, so being this like very sophisticated but very camp kind of elderly homosexual actor. And there's something, because like he does it like at the end of Act 1, he does like a bit of there's loads of Hamlet suffused throughout it, and he does like a bit of like Hamlet talking to the players at the end of Act 1, and it's like a monologue in front of the curtain. And because I'm an old League of Gentlemen fan, I can't help but think of him doing like a monologue as like the cabin tour guide in League of Gentlemen. Yeah, it's just kind of, he can't quite escape that, and the fact he's playing Gielgud as well, so he's wearing like a bald cap, so it's kind of, there is a bit of a League character to it. It's I just don't think those guys. I like their work, but varyingly, but I don't think they're ever going to escape being the League of Gentlemen for me, really.
Sure.
I think with Inside Number 9, Pemberton and Shearsmith have. Gatiss, for me, there's something about the way he acts that always has a tinge of League about it, I think.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, you could argue, I suppose, well, this is probably a bit patronising, but I suppose maybe he's had less practice branching out, I suppose. Maybe he's just been a bit more pigeonholed as that kind of, again, camp, I suppose, kind of, I don't know, that kind of arch figure, I suppose. I don't know. There's a lot of stuff in the play about Gielgud's own like repressed homosexuality. So there's like a scene where he like picks up a rent boy in New York and stuff like that, and it's very it's very kind of moving, and a bit, but I mean, it's also got like awards written all over it. I think people are saying it's like it's going to Broadway and stuff, and I can very much see it doing that kind of business. It was weird watching it again, talking of comedy, British comedy stuff, in The Trip, Steve Coogan and Rob Brydon, that Brydon's always doing like Richard Burton impressions and things like that. And the guy playing Richard Burton was doing full on Richard Burton with the voice and everything. And I was like, this is definitely feels like a B plot for The Trip, where Rob Brydon's a little bit too old to get the role or something. Yeah.
I mean, I think Gatiss. Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying about Gatiss. I quite liked him as he was in that 4, was it a 3 or 4 part that Russell T Davies did about was it Crossroads? No, Crossroads Hotel. Yeah, it was Crossroads.
Oh, I never saw that. I know the one you mean, but I didn't see that.
Yeah, which was a superb. I mean, what I liked about it was Russell T Davies' kind of love letter to daytime soaps, because he's been very kind of like, he was the guy who had that whole angry spiel about like, the BBC people saying no one watches Coronation Street, nobody watches Coronation Street, also watches Doctor Who, and him being like, yeah, we fucking do. And it was kind of very much his love letter to that kind of era as well. But he had Gatiss played Larry Grayson in that, and that was one of the few times, because I agree with you, James. I struggle with Gatiss's characterization quite a lot, but that was one of the few times when I felt like, yeah, he was starting to transcend a little bit the other work that I'd seen him do. It may just be that he really, really cared about it. I don't know, but I thought he did a lovely job with it. I really did. I was very impressed.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting as well. Like him gay. Well, I don't actually know. It was Grayson. I presume Grayson was actually gay. Was that part?
Oh, that's an assumption I've always made. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't actually know it though. Is it partly about that, Kit, or is it?
No, not at all. It was just about his friendship with the woman who was, the sort of queen of Crossroads, I guess. Yeah, it was absolutely just about their relationship. So no, I don't think sexuality. I don't remember his sexuality being referred to in the show, because it just wasn't what it was about. But they were very. Yeah, they were very good. They were very close friends, and very sort of. He was very supportive of her in her career and that sort. But he had some lovely scenes, and it was very much him talking about getting old in show business and what it was like. It was much more about that kind of thing. So yeah, he was gay. So I just looked it up. Wikipedia says.
Yeah. Was that on the iPlayer kit? Do you remember? Was that where did you see
I
that?
honestly can't. I have a feeling it was ITV actually. So
Yeah.
I don't know. But yeah, it was a good show. Oh yeah, okay. So he was actually targeted by gay rights campaigners who were saying like, "Come out of the closet, you coward."
Got you. Yeah.
So yeah,
I can't really imagine.
A thorny issue, isn't it?
really
Particularly
tricky.
at that time.
Well, this is it, right? Like, I mean, that's the other thing I was going to talk about. That the other thing that I watched with kiddo. So we watched World War Z, and then my missus was out, so we were going to watch another horror movie, and at the end we decided to watch Pride instead. And
oh my god, nice.
yeah, and I cried, as I always do at the end of Pride.
Every time.
Every single time.
I've never seen it, you know.
No, well, we should rectify that because it's a really I think it's just a fantastic piece of work. But obviously there's something very different. But I think there's something very different watching Pride with a something very different watching Pride with a 14-year-old as opposed to watching it, you know. And it already meant a lot to me as a movie. But I also wanted her to understand, you know, I wanted to give her a sense of what the political culture was like in the 80s, you know, around the thing, you know, and see the kind of the good and the bad of it, you know, the solidarity, but also the prejudice, including within the trade union movement, that was very real. I mean, the wonderful moment when they have the pits and perverts, right? And they're like, the whole thing about like, this is the history of our movement. They throw a slur at you and you take it and you own it and you make it yours. And it takes all the power away, you know. And seeing that, you know, obviously in the context of, you know, the word gay itself, but also queer and all this kind of stuff, and the way that's kind of the way that community has down the decades very successfully, you know, taken all those terms of abuse and turn them into kind of positive affirmation. So that was good. And yeah, but it was just super emotional. It always is. I mean, and it's, you know, it's really funny as well. It's worth remembering amongst all the other stuff. It's a screamingly funny movie in places, you know.
I must watch it. That miners stuff came up today because I was Olivia was watching a TikTok video and it was playing the William Tell overture on it, which is very Swiss of her. And then and I heard it and I was like, oh, Brassed Off, and she was like, what are you talking about? And I was like, oh, there's the end of. And I was trying to explain what Brassed Off was, and to little success. I think I might have told Kit this before. I might have told both of you this, but shortly before the 2017 election, I went with my now ex-wife and her family, and my mum as well, to the Royal Albert Hall, and they were playing an anniversary screening of Brassed Off, and it was one of those, like, you know, the film with a live accompaniment thing.
Yeah.
And it was just before the 2017 election, so the mood was very much we're all fucked again, and we're gonna and we were. But
yeah,
but obviously there was some ebbs and currents and twists to come yet. But it was a fantastic event, and they had some of the cast there, and they had like Pete Postlethwaite's family, where like his kids were there and stuff like that.
Right.
And they had like a little tribute to her. But the best bit was I don't know if you guys have ever gone to like a pub quiz or some other event where they play like heads and tails, where like they go they make everyone guess heads and tails, and you have your hands on your head, hands on your arse, and basically everyone sits down when the wrong coin toss is called. They did that with the entire Albert Hall. They got everyone to stand up like with a packed Royal Albert Hall and just called like heads and tails, and everyone, like, you know, was eliminated crucially until they could give away some like signed Brassed Off merchandise or something. It was nice. It was so fun. By the way, the thing you were saying, Kit, before about reclaiming slurs and stuff, that might come up during the chat a little bit, I think.
It's possible. Yeah.
Bit of stuff there. I'll introduce it now, actually, because I think organically we're going to sort of ebb and flow as we talk about aspects of the movie in question, and it's the Long Good Friday. It's the Long Good Friday, this sort of seminal British gangster movie from the beginning of the 80s.
London, Good Friday. Not just any Good Friday, but the Long Good Friday.
Outside of church? You're not crucifying people outside of church, not on Good Friday.
Harold Shand, undisputed king of London's underworld. Now he's setting up the biggest business deal of his career.
Hands across the ocean, right?
To the future.
Someone is out to stop him.
Can you think of anybody who might have an old score to settle or something? Who's big enough to take you on?
Someone, somewhere, knows, right? I want the man who knows. Right.
Who fancies what?
Auto, casino, stabbing, a bar blowing up. What is this, a gang war?
No, no question. Harold and I have no doubt that by tomorrow the problem will be settled.
Walk to the car, Billy, or I'll blow your spine off.
It's not a shooter, is it, Harold?
Oh, don't be silly, Billy. When I come hunting for you with me fingers...
I've treated you lot well, even when you was out of order, right? Well, now there's been an eruption.
One of my closest friends. He's lying out there in the freezer. And believe me, all of you, nobody goes home until I find out who done it.
What should have been the greatest day of Harold's life suddenly becomes the longest. Suddenly, he's fighting for survival.
You kidding? We got gang war in our hands, right? We already have. Colin's been carved up and I've got a bomb in me casino and you say nothing unusual?
The long Good Friday, a terrifying nightmare from which there is no escape. The long Good Friday.
I kind of want to talk a little bit about, I suppose, just very initially about how, what I guess was why I suggested it to you guys for chatting about, or at least a few aspects of that. More of them will come out. But it's a film I really like, and I watched it many years ago. I think when I was in my late teens. You know, when you're sort of exploring, you know, all the classics, and you know, you're kind of trying to work out what's cool and what vibes with you and what doesn't. And it was a movie that, in some ways, I took a while to come around to. And I think, and even to get around to watching, and I think some of that, and I might have mentioned this to you guys, that I suppose this caveat to everything that I say tonight, I might have mentioned this to you guys just before Christmas when we were discussing the movie and watching the movie. But The Long Good Friday, when I was growing up and becoming a film fan in the sort of late 90s, it had an air of kind of Britpop cool about it. It featured in a lot of kind of film for, you know, lad-centered kind of, these are the quotes you must know, you know, these are the kind of cool, iconic, particularly British characters, you know, badass characters that you must know. This is around the time Lock, Stock came out, and in the wake of Lock, Stock as well, you know, so going into the noughties. And I remember things like having some sort of book or like magazine that had like quotes from Harold Shand, Bob Hoskins, protagonist in The Long Good Friday, you know, particularly his speech to the Americans at near the very end of it. And you know, you were meant to celebrate these. I had a particular, I had this sort of problem with Get Carter as well. I didn't watch Get Carter for many years. I've seen it now, but it was that similar sort of, you know, badass, laddish, kind of blokey, you know, again, Britpop, or I suppose the decline of Britpop, really. I was growing up into the decline of Britpop. I will sort of say I was a bit late for Britpop. I came in at the end with, like, you know, This Is Hardcore by Pulp and things like that. I basically arrived in time for the after party, or just to pick up the cups at the end. Yeah, so I encouraged, you know, we were getting together for various reasons to watch movies before Christmas, and I suggested this one, and I knew that I wanted to get you guys, both of you guys, ideally to talk about it for various reasons. James, had you? I think you had seen this before I encouraged that, right?
That's correct, yeah. I've seen this before Christmas. I'd watched it a few times, and it was definitely the same kind of thing as what you described. You catch up on the important kind of... In some ways, for me, certainly, there was a blokishness to the first films that I felt like I was allowed to love. The likes of The Godfather, Carlito's Way, Long Good Friday, that's all in there, within that. And the first few watches definitely had, I think, I only took in that surface because that's all I was looking for from that. And on that respect, it delivers. It delivers more so than a Guy Ritchie film, for example, in that there is a genuine sense of these people and these streets. And there's a real danger and jeopardy that runs throughout the whole of The Long Good Friday. And the feeling of events starting to fall out of the control of people, which for, I think, the lesser films that followed it up, that kind of came in its wake, that had Noel Gallagher playing a Union Jack coloured guitar on the front of the DVD case, they, I think they were much lesser works, and because they're all put into this box, certainly for me, there's a diminution of what Long Good Friday is. Having returned to it with perhaps a bit more taste and a little bit of understanding of things, I think this is very much one of the great films up there and ready to be spoken of in the same breath as Metropolis, Casablanca, Good Burger 2, the whole range of it all. And this really, no, I had a fantastic time watching it with you both, and it's beautiful in its subtlety, and it's wonderful, almost unique in catching this particular time and place. And as somebody who's got an interest in post-war British history, particularly post-war London history, particularly South London post-war history, this is a film that absolutely sings for me.
Yeah, well, I kind of, I'm not sure how this works exactly, but my glee that you had already watched it, James, and would have thoughts about it already was only matched by my glee that Kit hadn't. Kit, what were your first impressions of it? Well, I guess actually before we talk about that, how much did you even know about it before I encouraged you to watch it?
I mean, very little, because I had in my head, for some reason, I cross-referenced Long Good Friday with Mona Lisa, another Bob Hoskins movie. And so I think I was going in expecting, and I know nothing about Mona Lisa except there's a scene in it that everyone says is really disturbing of some kind of sexual nature that involves Bob Hoskins. That's all I know. But it was enough to kind of confuse me when I was watching the movie, and enough so that when the meat hook sequence started, I started getting very nervous indeed, which is fine. But I think no. So I knew basic. I mean, I knew less than I thought I knew actually going in. If that even makes sense. So yeah, no, that was it. I was just. It turned out about as cold, as blind as you could possibly be. Which was great. I'm increasingly of the opinion that where it's ever possible to do that with a movie or a novel, especially one that's got a bit of weight or a bit of baggage attached to it, it's probably desirable if you can to go in blind, or certainly for me, it's a desirable experience. And yeah, I think, how did I feel after that first viewing? I mean, I think it's I say this a lot, but I think it's true. I think it's a horror movie rather than a crime movie. I think it might even be a gothic horror. It might be The Return of the Repressed. It's about, because I mean, the Docklands regeneration stuff is fascinating. As James noted, it's a film that's screamingly of the moment in which it was made. And I've had this theory for a while now that when it comes to works, whether they're novels or movies, one of your best chances at longevity as a writer in particular is to be as screamingly contemporary as you can. Because if you capture your moment of time in amber well enough, it will resonate down the ages, and it'll be something that people want to come back to. And I think The Long Good Friday, I mean, looking up and seeing it was made in 1980, I mean, it's impossibly perfect in the way it crystallizes and captures the beginning of the Thatcher era, and a period of time we might call in Britain the long 1980s, right at the start. And what's fascinating about it for me is that it captures both the kind of propaganda spirit of the era in the persona of Bob Hoskins's character, but it also, for me anyway, also very clearly displays the enormous structural flaws that are underneath that, the kind of gaping maw, and the kind of moral vacuum, but also the kind of inherent kind of, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, violence, decay, but the stewing underbelly of that apparently positive revolution that was happening, which was of course not so much a revolution as a counter-revolution. But so I think I was just blown away by it, and pretty much every aspect of it. The soundtrack, the score is absolutely incredible. Hoskins is just jaw-dropping. Helen Mirren is also jaw-dropping. Kind of the whole cast. It's one of those great movies where there just isn't a weak link that I could detect. Everybody seemed to be going for it. I was thinking about what James had to say about Guy Ritchie. I think one of the things that's interesting for me about Long Good Friday is, unlike Guy Ritchie movies, one of the principal ways it's superior, certainly in terms of the writing, is it doesn't fall into that trap of a Guy Ritchie movie where all the characters actually talk exactly the same way. It's one of the biggest flaws for me of those, especially the Lock, Stock. And I have a lot of time for Lock, Stock and Snatch. I enjoy them both. I think they're really fun movies. But actually, in the vast majority of cases, you could swap the dialogue between the characters and it would be completely interchangeable. because it's actually written by a very specific voice, and that voice permeates the whole thing. Whereas I think what's fascinating about Longer Friday is, even though for the most part it is a bunch of kind of South London gangsters, that's the vast majority of the cast, they're all distinct characters. They don't all talk or think the same way, and you see that play out even amongst the smaller characters who don't have as many lines. They've very much got their own personalities, their own mentalities, their own kind of thought process and so forth, and it gives it a richness. I mean, it makes it feel real in a way that a Ritchie movie doesn't, and that's despite, I mean, Hoskins' central performance, I imagine we're going to spend some time talking about. It is extraordinary, and there are times in it where it can feel over the top in some ways, but then I think for those of us who've lived in that part of the world and have met people who've lived in that area for a long time and know, like, it's really not actually exaggerated. It really isn't. And of course, the other thing about Hoskins' performance is the way he moves between different modes as well. There are aspects when it's big because he is, as the character, performing. He's placing himself on a stage, and therefore he's delivering his lines in a certain way. But then, of course, later in the movie, he has more moments of introspection, and you start to see, the man behind that mask to a certain degree. It's very, very different. So it's a very layered performance. I can imagine people watching the first 5 minutes and being quite turned off potentially, but if they do, they're missing a fucking treat, because it's actually an extraordinary bit of acting. I think an incredible central performance, but the whole movie is just, it's fucking fantastic, man. And it was a real, like, to watch something that, I don't know how many of those all-time classics I haven't yet seen, but it was great to kind of get that experience and for it to live up to the hype.
Well, there's a lot to follow up there, Kit. I think and we'll get onto. We certainly will talk about Hoskins' performance. I've realised that on a much earlier episode of the EscapeGoat podcast, we talked on this podcast with my mate Drew about Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And this is the second. This is a return for Hoskins to the podcast, and another movie that with loads of weird sort of genre fuckery in it, essentially, and with neo noir elements in a very different direction, because I think this has those as well. It's interesting you should talk about Long Good Friday being a horror movie, Kit, because when I asked you both to talk about it, with your own interest bringing to it, obviously there's some stuff that you'll both find in it. We'll talk about it together, but James, with you, I was thinking, about your political interests and about, your London background, and also, also the Irishness in it, because I really want to talk about that. Kit, with you, I was thinking about the ending primarily, because, we're obviously going to talk about the ending, and, you and I have talked about, very, extreme horror scenarios and about the way in which horror narratives can end and can shock. And I think the ending is, we'll be spoiling Long Good Friday, by the way. The ending is something that, especially since watching it with you guys in December, it's just percolated in my head again and again and again and again, over and over, almost as much as the score has. And I think I'm more and more convinced that it's one of the best endings to a film I've ever seen, basically. And I think, I know it's famous for that anyway. this isn't me being fresh, but like I think it resonates with me in a way that I think we'll probably talk about and everything. But James, I want you to sort of I want you to talk a little bit about kind of the London that you see in this movie, and the kind of, and obviously it's distant from, yourself and me and, our experience of London, but someone who grew up in South London and sort of will recognize, a lot of the locations used in it and stuff. And what do you feel about the kind of the London of the Long Good Friday in its historical moment,
It's really curious because I'm obviously a child of the 1990s, which is my first memories of this city, probably 14 years after this film was released. And these are very early childhood memories for me. But I grew up in an area, didn't have a lot of money, where there wasn't a lot of regeneration. So looking around this, a lot of these streets are familiar. A lot of stuff had happened in between them. And to have this kind of, it feels in some ways a portal to the past, this film, in a way that just films in general don't always do. And also period pieces, you can never ever capture the feeling of a time or of a place the way that Long Good Friday manages to do. And I'm not completely sure why that is, because there is a cinema verite approach to the direction that's going on there. But there's also, alongside that documentary side of things, I think there's a heightened reality to the way that it takes on these very big personalities. And these are big personalities in a way that these type of people are in reality. This is just how these people move through the world and interact with their surroundings. So to see the city through their eyes. And these are a dying or dead generation now as well. These people's attitudes, as much as right-wing provocateurs want to, have pretty much been buried. It's not their world anymore. But seeing them kind of reach a kind of peak of their power in front of us just before international finance and the bankers say, actually, this city now belongs to us. There's an honest beauty even in their exploitation of what's around them, I think, because there's a limit to the ambition of how much they're going to steal and hollow out the city. So I look at the London of Long Friday and I see, despite its poverty, I still see that there's a lot to offer there, the people who actually live within it. And before our very eyes in the film, we see it happening, that there's less there. There's, bomb sites from the war of 30, 40 years previously. And certainly no one's working very hard to look after the poor, because nobody ever does. But when I look at the London of Long Good Friday, it reminds me that this is a city that used to be for the people who lived there, or at least was a lot more. So very odd to look at this somewhat hopeless film and feel a little bit of envy for the location.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean, and without lionizing, the sort of men at the center of this narrative, because obviously they have their flaws. I
don't want it to turn into that Monty Python sketch about the Piranha Brothers. Well, they were honest.
There are a few bits in this that actually do bring that up in my head, and I think we might have talked about that in December actually. But there are a few bits. I think anything involving razors. Let's pour one out for razors straight away. By the way, I think we'll return to talking about new cult star of the podcast, razors. But I think we'll talk. James, in all seriousness, we'll go back to talking about the Brixton portion as well. That where they briefly visit Brixton as well, because that's very interesting, isn't it, in terms of it being a moment in time. And I think the fact that it is this London that I never knew, and that you never knew as well, that so much. But the fact that I arrived in London, I've lived in London for like 12 years now, and I arrived just after the Olympics. When the regeneration of this wave, of the overground going out through East London, but the Olympic Village, everything that's happened to Peckham, for example, all that kind of stuff. I've sort of seen. I guess I came in the middle of that really, but it's continued to shape the areas that I know of London. I now live in South London, very near Elephant and Castle, so I'm seeing all the regeneration happening there. I'm going, I can't remember if I showed you this kit. I think I did. No, I think you've both seen this, but James certainly has. But I dropped that clip to you guys months ago of Bob Hoskins talking to Barry Norman in the early 80s, where he's walking along the London Docklands. It's after Long Good Friday comes out, because they make reference to Long Good Friday, but it's Hoskins giving Barry Norman a tour of the docks down by Tower Bridge and on that stretch of the river, and talking about regeneration and talking about the sort of bastardization of London by capital and all that kind of stuff. And definitely going to put that in the show notes, because it's worth watching as I don't know if it's on the Blu-ray of the Long Good Friday as an extra, but it certainly should be. And you will fall in love with the unlikely duo of Bob Hoskins and Barry Norman trespassing casually throughout some London warehouses. It's fantastic. But yeah, I mean, Kit, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about I suppose Harold Shand as a protagonist, and I think I'm going to gratuitously bring up The Sopranos whatever you say. I'm going to bring up The Sopranos afterwards, so maybe think about that in context. And obviously you'll touch a bit on Hoskins' performance as well, but what do you make of Harold Shand?
It's really interesting, and I'm glad you mentioned, you queued me up, because I wanted to pick up on something James had to say about that particular generation, and the idea of this generation reaching the peak of its power, and then having the legs cut out from under it by the Thatcherite economic model that it's so enthusiastically embraced. I mean, that's kind of there's a wonderful scrambling around the European project, which I think we'll probably want to unpick in more detail later, but. As far as Harold, I mean, the bit I particularly wanted to pick up on in relation to that, though, is I think he's a fascinating character, because for me, he is, and it's not made explicit in the film, but with it being 1980 and him looking the age he is, there is a moment when he talks about having done national service. Now, my guess is that he was part of the immediate post-war national service. It's almost certain that this guy never actually saw action. And the reason I say that is because I feel like if he had, it would have come up at that part of the conversation. A man like that does not go in that scene where he's talking about his ex-army, comrade if they'd seen action together, that's been what you'd have talked about. The fact he says we did national service together, that tells me he's immediately post-war generation. So he came of age just after, you know, I mean, he just missed it, right? That's the point. He just missed World War II. Now that generation's really interesting to me because one of the things that we've seen, and one of the kind of fuels for the you know, for I mean, the Brexit generation is a horrible phrase to use to describe a demographic of people because they weren't all voting for Brexit, but there certainly are a lot of people who I saw, I'm sure we all did during that campaign, who talked an awful lot about Blitz spirit, Dunkirk spirit, blah, blah, blah. And you look them up and realize they were at least 10, 15 years too young for that to be a meaningful real life reference for them in terms of lived experience. What they're doing is almost like cargo culting what their parents would have seen and done and talked about. And I feel like this guy, you know, one of the things about this guy that really strikes me is that little detail for me feels like the key to his entire character. Like, yeah, he did national service, but he wasn't in the war. And I keep thinking about Roger Daltrey. I would, because I did a lot of studying of him and Townsend for the Tommy book. And one of the quotes about Daltrey, I've never been able to get it out of my head, when he talks about the mod movement. And he said, you know, we came of age and every generation before us had gone to war to prove their manhood or to prove who they were or to find their place. And we didn't, because we were that post-war generation and it wasn't going to happen. So we're classic. This is such a Daltrey statement. So, you know, the Who, that was our war, you know, and it's like, okay, well, that's just a fantastically tasteless thing to say. Just spectacularly tasteless, but also I think very revealing of a particular mentality, you know, and you know, Daltrey was, you know, very much working class guy from that kind of area, you know. He's the first time he saw his dad was returning from war when he was like 4 or 5. So, you know, he had that experience that whole generation had of growing up in an environment. I described this in the Tommy book, and it must have been like a giant monster had just stomped through the world before you appeared in it. And the footprints are everywhere, with the rubble and with the rationing and national service, and also the psychological state of your parents, right? And the fact that they're not talking about whatever it is that's fucked them up, but they're really strange in whatever way they're strange. And like, you know, I mean, you know, wars fuck people up, but it's interesting. I think post-war fucks people up too, in the sense that you grow up in that environment and you must feel it all the time, and yet you didn't experience it directly. And I think for some people, I think the way that affects your psychology is a need to kind of, need to prove yourself. A need to find a way meaningfully to prove yourself against a benchmark you can never prove yourself against, because you're never going to have to fight the Nazis in hand-to-hand combat unless you happen to find yourself in Cable Street. So I think for me, Hoskins' character is very much like, he's of that generation, and it's really specific, and it's really important how specific it is. Like it's national service, but it's post-war. So you know, when you think about his capacity for violence, but you also think about how much this guy like peacocks, you know what I mean? The way the guy puffs himself up, the way the guy always, I mean, he juts out his lower jaw like fucking King Kong at times. And it feels, it's not quite an affectation, but it's not quite not an affectation either. Do you know what I mean? And it's all there in the performance. Like, I think he's extraordinary, and it's really important to note he is, and I appreciate the filmmakers doing this. He is an unreconstructed racist. He does have that very kind of, you know, everything was great before this wave of immigration turned up and ruined everything, except he uses much coarser language than that to describe it. And I think that's important because I'm struggling a lot with this at the moment for various reasons. I struggle with trying to find honest depictions of working class London that would acknowledge the contradictions and acknowledge that there are aspects of working class life in general where you can find impressive solidarity across various lines of oppression. There can also at times be a lot of prejudice, and it makes sense that this character in particular would have those prejudices because he is clearly. And what I love about it is that the core of his character for me is he is absolutely a creature who looks at the moment of the Thatcherite revolution and thinks, this is my moment, not understanding at all that in the moment of that revolution, he is as irrelevant as a coal miner, and he will be flattened by exactly the same machine as the as the National Union of Miners are going to be in a few years.
Yeah,
like he's actually going to be flattened by the same thing.
That's really fascinating. Yeah, the sort of tentative grasp of Harold Shand on everything. It was only today in watching it that it was a pretty obvious point, really, I suppose. But when you like to do a bit sort of COD analysis of like character names, I was like, Harold is such a really interesting English name to give this character, because my kind of main association when I started really thinking about it was, he's the king of his own private kingdom. But the most famous Harold we have in British history of that is Doomed. He's the Harold who goes to Hastings. He's the Harold who gets an arrow in the eye.
It's so funny.
The Conquerors. That's fantastic.
I thought you were going to go with Steptoe, but I mean that works too.
That's in there as well. Yeah, but yeah, that occurred to me today. But yeah, I mean, I said I'd mentioned The Sopranos, the idea of coming in at the end of something, and that kind of things.
Absolutely.
I'll go into that more. I think particularly when we talk about the ending, I want to say more about Tony, but like about the idea. I noticed there's also bits where they call Harold H, which is like T in The Sopranos. Yeah. As well. I really genuinely would like to know if David Chase has ever seen The Long Good Friday. I imagine he has, but I feel like if you kind of, obviously on The Sopranos there's a huge Scorsese influence, but I feel like Long Good Friday's in the blender somewhere as well with it. But I want to sort of use this excuse kit actually to bring up the sort of main conceit I was talking to you guys about before, I think in December as we were watching the movie, where I sort of, as we were watching it, realized that the thing that Long Good Friday was reminding me of, it's funny you talk about, it being ushering in the long 80s, but also being a product of the 70s, in conception and being made. And I think it is like Raging Bull, one of those movies that sort of sits at the juncture point of both decades, it's of the 70s, but transmitting into the 80s, literally. I was talking about sitcoms, and we were watching it, and I was watching, I was thinking about the plot. I was thinking, what's going on here, and what's the essential situation here? For people who haven't seen it, please watch it. The plot basically involves Harold Shand, a British, London gangster, essentially trying to get a business partnership set with the mafia, and to that end, he has two American mafioso, one of them a lawyer, come over to London, and he's essentially trying to show off and peacock to them and kind of ink this business deal, shady business deal involving regeneration and money changing hands with the London Docklands, and then having to deal with complications, But I was thinking, what does this remind me of? And I realized it's funny you talk about all the the European stuff, Kit, the common market, etc. It's absolutely uncut Basil Fawlty. It is. He's a sitcom character. Harold Shand is a sitcom character. It's, as I mentioned to you both, I rewatched an episode of Fawlty Tales today. It's the hotel inspectors meets Waldorf salad. It's them blended together. It's that with more gore. It's the Americans are coming over, the inspectors are coming over, and we've got to keep everything hush. But there's a body. It's there's a bit.
So
of
it's a kid for the corpse as well. Yeah.
Exactly. There's bodies that you have to hurry out the door. Essentially, he's basically I mean, what's he called? Jeff. He's kind of like his Polly. He's got like this like help. Going on. It's a farce. It's a dark farce, but it's all about the keeping up appearances, and it's all about seething anger and resentment and frustration. And that bit, saying the film 4 quotes bit, at the end where he tells off the Americans, it's pure Basil Fawlty. They're even in a hotel room. And he finally gets to vent, he finally gets to vent all this kind of English kind of inferiority that's actually superiority, that's actually inferiority under that, that's actually superiority under that. It's all like stripping off him like layers under a blowtorch. It's absolutely. It's absolutely fantastic. And I think understanding this as a very dark comedy kind of opened it up for me in a way that I hadn't done before watching it with you guys. So I think that really helped me out.
I'll add in another one then. It's also like Gourmet Night, except instead of beating his car with a stick, he stabs someone in the throat with a bottle. But actually that scene is that scene. It's the same thing. Because the other thing about the movie, the other thing about Shannon in the movie that's really important that you picked, that you sort of mentioned there, the crucial thing is that he is 2 steps behind the entire way, which interestingly means for most of the movie, so is the audience. Because that's one of the fascinating things about a first time viewing, and one of the reasons that the movie is such a joy to rewatch. It's because your first time through, you're shown quite a lot of things, but they are intentionally presented in an opaque way, so that you learn at the same time that Hoskins' character does what's actually fucking going on, And I love that about it. I love the balls of that, and I love how it takes like 2/3 of the fucking movie before it tells you what's going on, and then as soon as you learn what's going on, it all clicks into place. And you're like, oh shit, you. And of course, what's interesting about it is 2 things. One is like narratively at that point, it might already be too late. You might have already fucked this up too badly. But secondly, because of the nature of his character, you certainly know if it isn't too late, it will be in 5 seconds time, because this man cannot do what he needs to do to put this straight and make it right. Fucking fascinating, really, really fascinating. I think
you need $1 million computer to work out what's going on here.
Yeah, well, he's a sort of lovably befuddled character, isn't he? That's on my rewatch today. I was thinking, there's just so many bits, like from the first sort of 10 minutes that you get to know Harold in this, after a bit of lead in, things start going wrong, and it's that sense of disbelief, which is kind of weirdly adorable, but he's very childlike, isn't he? He's very kind of as things start to slide away, he's genuinely, he gets angry, obviously he has his moments of anger and outbursts and terrifying outbursts and outbreaks of anger, but he's more like a confused child, isn't he? He's kind of asking people, what's going on, who are these people, what's happening? It's kind of, there's a befuddlement with the whole thing.
That's also very Basil, though, isn't it? That's also very Basil Fawlty. Like, what's going on? What is going on? And the kind of, with Basil also that sense of wounded pride. Why is this happening to me? Now with Harold, that manifests in different ways, as you know, often with violence or the brooding. I mean, I love the brooding. I love the brooding over the body of his friend in the swimming pool. That long soliloquy about, we did national service together, blah blah blah. But the way he goes, almost, you almost see like his eyes glaze over as he sort of goes interior. Like he's not really thinking about what he's saying. He's kind of verbally processing and riffing and just trying to work out, just trying to find his place in that particular moment. And you almost see him like visibly come to himself, realize he's in front of his men and he needs to snap the act back into place. But yeah, you're right. The befuddlement's great because, I mean, it's nice as well because it does mirror, again, for a first-time viewer, it mirrors the audience befuddlement. We don't have a fucking clue what's going on either because we don't, like him, we don't have most of the salient information we need to make sense of the events as they're playing out. But I also, what I love about it is he's befuddled and he doesn't even know what he doesn't know, and he kind of knows he doesn't know what he doesn't know. Like, I mean, the scene where they kind of torture the supergrass, like you can see it in Hoskins' face when it's going on. By about halfway through the conversation, he already fucking knows this guy doesn't know anything. Whatever's going on, he has to carry it on because he has to keep the front up to his men, and he has to demonstrate to everybody what a tough guy is. But he already knows. And there's a wonderful scene where they're driving in the car, and he just says, "Who could it be?
Yeah,
who even is there?" And I think his Razors actually says, "Well, you kind of killed them all, didn't you?"
Yeah, well, that was reminding me about that. I think I told you guys about this in December, but that famous sort of anecdote, I don't know if it's true or not, about Stalin, like on his deathbed, he was, like someone was like, "Well, what would you say to your detractors or your enemies?" And he was like, "Well, I don't have to say anything because I've killed them all," And Hoskins has a bit of that, and you kind of that emphasizes that you are coming in at the end of a story here, isn't it? Right. This is the very opposite to an origin myth. To set up, it's like it's actually the last bit of Beowulf, really. You're getting in right at the end, and you can imagine all these epic prequels, and God, if anyone's listening, for God's sake, don't make them. I'm not suggesting that.
We've got the Sopranos. We don't need it.
Yeah. But you do get the feeling that you are coming in. These grand adventures have happened. That he has beaten. If this is his Ragnarok, he's gone through a lot to get there.
Yeah.
And I want to talk, because we'll have a little break before too long, and we'll have a catch our breaths, and then talk about many other aspects of the movie, including the fabulous Helen Mirren, and the floor will be yours, Kit. But just to cue that up, and it'll come up again, obviously. But James, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the sort of nature of the ultimate threat that Harold's facing in this, because it's essentially the IRA. It's Irishness, subsumed Irishness. Kit was talking before about this as a gothic horror movie. As someone who grew up in London and has Irish heritage and background yourself, what do you think about the way the Irish are portrayed in this, and about kind of, I suppose, like what they might mean in this movie overall, in whatever direction you want there?
So we see them through, like we do with most of this, through Harold's eyes. And I think Harold is made into being a likable, identifiable character despite his brutality and violence, because he's the audience identification figure, because he's learning, as we do, about what's going on. So for that reason, we see that we see the Irish as he would, through his patriotic, British, full-minded perspective. They can't be a threat for this reason and this reason. I've seen off, worse gangs than this in the past, like sod carriers. They don't do that. I don't imagine Harold Shand is a man who's paid an awful lot of attention to the headlines, or at least outside the South London press. So for him to tangle with a force that is not only beyond him, but as there is a direct line in the film, he's actually beyond capable of understanding their motivations. Um, it makes the film, and as Chit says, it is a horror film. As you say, David, it is a farce. It's also a tragedy because of the way this man is built. He's utterly incapable of understanding that he's dealing with men who are as tough as he is, which he hasn't encountered much through his life. We can tell that, and also who are doing these things for a cause they believe with their heart and soul. Now, Harold does believe in money, he does believe in power, but he hasn't come from a situation where his father and his grandfather would have had these deep embedded wrongs sent down the generations over the fireside, bringing that level of power to there. So the film, I think, is completely honest about the Shand character. It's also honest about everyone that he encounters, and that includes showing the brutality. And as an audience, I think we are meant to take the IRA as almost moral neutral in this situation, which is extremely brave at the onset of Thatcherism. I think that there's almost a sense of catharsis at the end where Hoskins has found that he can't peacock, he can't bully. He's met the final, the final boss, in a sense. We watch him, and at the start of the film, he is apparently civilized. He's got a naughty past behind him. And it's not a linear process, but we watch him go from apparently civilized to a childlike barbarianism. It happens in bits and pieces. It's wonderfully modulated the way he does it as well.
Yeah.
And when we see him face off against this force that he can't and couldn't understand, I think that there is an otherness to the way that the Irish are portrayed. But again, I think that's just a reflection of how the character sees it, about the writers writing their understanding in the most honest way. But if it hadn't been, I'm arguing myself about this now, David, because I'm wondering, is there another terrorist organisation that it would have worked with? Should we have had the Libyans here? And I think because of the gothic nature of it, because of, to quote the Tupac line, some punk I roughed up way back, that's who I have to fear. It does have to be an Irishness because of what the British have done wrong over there. Now here comes the Europeans from the other side. So I think it's thematically very clever as well.
Yeah, no, I think so. And I think it's funny you talk about the othering of the Irish. I think that is there, but it's not a patronizing othering, is it? If anything, it's a slightly awestruck othering.
Yeah.
And that's what I was going to say. You know, we'll talk more about the scene in question, but the scene where Harold confronts Jeff and ends up killing him, killing his sort of heir, essentially. The way Jeff talks about him, and indeed the thing that gets him killed directly, essentially, is, he starts talking about how Harold is beneath the Irish, how he's not, he cannot stand up to them. The phrase that actually gets him killed is that you're the shit on their shoe.
Shoes.
They won't even notice. He talks, whereas Harold wants to talk about them as beetles, as ants. But Jeff turns that back on him and goes, yeah, they are like ants. That you kill 20 of them, you kill 40 of them, they'll come back. There's no getting around this. That this is some sort of elemental force, and I think. To conjure up that aspect of the Irish Gothic, I suppose, in a sense, when you're talking about a movie that's kind of working on these graveyards of dock lambs, the graveyards of the sort of merchants of empire, I mean, who was working those docks, apart from the South Londoners, who were the other people working those docks, where were the boats going? The ghosts are everywhere, aren't they? And I think we'll talk more specifically about Brosnan at the end, because that's he's like kind of another category, but the fact that they have the angel of death working for them seems to kind of help. And he's the angel of death who turns to you with a smile as well. Like that's the kind of appointment in Samara kind of aspect of this that I want to get into at the end. But Kit, I mean, do you we will break into a sec, we'll have a glass of water, but did you have any thoughts initially, I suppose, about the way the Irish are used in this?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything James said. I mean, for me, and I think I'm really glad, James, you brought up the tragedy element of it, because that's super important. And what you said there at the end really resonated with me. You're right. What's fascinating about this movie is it's a man who, I think part of the reason that Harold disintegrates so completely through the course of this narrative is precisely because at the start of the movie, he believes he's at the cusp of finally achieving a level of respectability. He's finally going to have laundered all of the dirty money. All of the blood stains are going to go away. He's going to be untouchable. He's going to be a millionaire, but he's going to be a legit millionaire. He's not going to be a street millionaire anymore. He's going to have, no one's going to be able to question where the money's come from. He's going to be, he's finally going to achieve, this is it. This is the goal, right? And instead of it being his moment of ascension, it becomes, as you described it, I think, David, his moment of Ragnarok, actually. It becomes his moment. But that's why he disintegrates so completely. And that's why the shit on your shoes comment is the thing that gets that guy killed. Because in that moment, you see it on Hoskins' face. He realizes that he's in danger of regressing all the way back to that street kid who fought his way up through violence in the ruins of post-war London to build this thing. And the whole thing might have been built on sand in the first place. Like there might, and that's the one truth he can't face. That's the one idea that he cannot possibly begin to engage. So when someone later on explicitly says to him, you can, and I love the line, by the way, you cannot reason with these people. They don't care about money. The idea that reason and the belief in money, those are interchangeable, right? If money is not your primary motivation, you are fundamentally not reasonable. You're something else, right? And again, I don't think the writers believe that. I think the writers believe the characters believe that. I think, I'm willing to give them that level of credit. But yeah, I think that's why that psychological disintegration and also that reversion to violence as well happens with this character. It's an inevitable consequence. And of course, there's nothing more tragic than that. That's the definition of tragedy. And to bring up the point of the representation of the IRA, and this is an elemental force, it reminded me of nothing so much as I think is it Fortinbras turning up at the end of Hamlet and just being like, oh, okay, everyone's dead. Good. I haven't got to go to war then. Just walking in. There's certainly an element of that to it for me, which again is that, because you're right, James, the IRA are treated as a force of nature. They're an element, almost a supernatural force, certainly an elemental one. And it is, what's interesting to me about it is the movie at least gestures at this. It is because of that asymmetry. That's the fundamental thing, the asymmetry between Hoskins' character, who's pursuing material wealth for personal gain, and an organization pursuing fundamentally pursuing a political goal through various means. And it's that asymmetry that fucks him up as much as anything else, because all the loyalty that Hoskins has, all the loyalty that character has, he has bought. Mm-hmm. He's either bought through financially or through fear of violence. But for the people within the IRA that are serving within the IRA on the mainland of England, there's something completely different going on in their motivations, in the mentality, and the way they approach it. And for me, the interesting thing, I almost wanted to say they're almost like a faceless force. And then, of course, the image of a 25-year-old Pierce Brosnan jumped up in my head, and I was like, you can't really say that, because whatever the opposite of faceless is, that's what Pierce Brosnan is when he's on screen in this movie. But definitely, yeah, that sense of the elemental is really, and there is another ring there, and that is kind of disturbing. But I think the othering comes from a place of genuine naked fear, certainly on the part of Hoskins' character, and that fear comes from fundamentally, I don't understand you. I don't understand what motivates you, because all of the things that I know as the traditional levers are not going to work. And therefore, I can't compute. And I think that is, I think that's fascinating. I think it's really, really interesting. I think Jason's right. It had to be, in this context, it had to be the IRA. Who else could it possibly be, given the wider context of the story? And again, the historical moment, I keep coming back to that. This is just a film that captures a historical moment in amber.
I've just thought there, Kit, based on what you were saying, of two very well visually represented thematic points. The first of them is that we see the child on the street that Shand has come from. That's so clever to bring that. That's where he fears reversion to. And they make a point of saying, that's where I started out, protecting cars. The other thing is, what odd, counterintuitive, but aesthetically appropriate, choice to have Brosnan be the face, a young, beautiful, prime of life Brosnan, be the face of this terrorist organisation. And he's ready to charm you, even at the moment of your death, whether it happens between him and Harold's associate in the swimming pool, or at the very end of the film in the car. At the same time, there's a twinkle in this man's eye. He enjoys his work. It could very easily have been some ugly potato-faced bruiser. I think that's what they would have cast if you had been a lesser artist at the time and been someone who wanted a wide release. So yeah, why would you have a young, beautiful man represent your terrorist organisation? You have to be saying something about what it represents in this cinematic universe. And I think it's also, not only are we seeing him fighting something that he can't understand, but there's also youth versus age here. That would be why you'd make that choice, wouldn't it? Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense.
Even just to focus on Harold himself, it's but also Colin, his associate, in the swimming pool. Your impending doom comes to you with a swagger and a flirt and a smirk, doesn't he? And, at the end, we'll talk about the ending again, keep sort of teasing it, but, I really do want to go deep on that at the end. But I think there's something about, the ways in which your death could just look at you and just grin. You kind of see all the things playing over your face and you go, yeah. I got you good there, didn't I? But we'll get into that in part 2. Let's have a small break and then we'll come back and talk about Helen Mirren.
And related topics.
Yeah,
It was on Good Friday there, Bob. You had that diatribe about what they were doing to London. Now, how much of that was the actor and how much of that was Bob Hoskins expressing his own beliefs?
Well, I thought it was going over the top. I thought it was all sort of, fairyland, but after finding out what's been going on down here, that makes a Long Good Friday look like a story out of Winnie the Pooh.
Well, what is going on?
Well, that, for example, look at that. A bleeding great Mars bar on the Thames. But it's sort of...
An office block, actually, but still.
Yeah, it's a Mars bar. But there's £1,200 million worth of redevelopment going to go on right the way down the river. The whole lot. Right? You imagine that. The whole thing's up for grabs. Makes a 60s sort of redevelopment epidemic look like a little rash. You see that building there?
Yeah.
Now, between there and here, there's going to be a bleeding great block of offices is going to go up in between us. And that's just a fraction of the mile-long slab of buildings that will change the face of Waterloo and the river there, if the developer, Greycoat Commercial Estates, gets their way. But the people who live in the area known as Coin Street have already put forward their own plan. And after a year-long public inquiry, Michael Esseltine has got to choose which one to go for. It's another battle of Waterloo. Only this time it's between the big guys in their office blocks and the little guys fighting for what's left of their community.
Well, what we've got here, Bob, is the Coin Street car park, but it looks like the oldest bomb site in London.
Well, it wasn't bombed.
What happened?
Well, they pulled that down for the Festival of Britain in 1951. That's how it's been ever since. Look at it.
Well, what was here before?
Houses. People used to live here.
Well, what happened to the people?
Well, they've stacked them all up in concrete blocks. They've left all this totally open for property developers to make a fortune out of spaces that used to be people's homes. Listen, last year, London spent £12.5 million on homeless people, right?
Yeah.
£2 million in Lambeth alone.
Yeah.
Look at it. The crazy thing is, the whole area is actually zoned for housing, not for offices. So the Greycoat scheme is trying to change all that and alter the plan the Waterloo people themselves got together. Right next to Coin Street is this example of what happens if you don't consult the local people. In 1970, a huge property group said they'd build flats, shops and a hotel, not to mention a riverside walk, if they could have a great tower for one of their companies to put their staff in, handy for their head office next door. Well, once they got the tower up, the company brass pushed off down to Surrey. Their building was sold off and the new owners are now doing it up a bit to let it. And now they say they're going to move out of the tower as well.
And welcome back, gents. And I just wanted to talk to you a little bit more. Well, there's a few different aspects of the film I wanted to touch on, actually, in a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about the music, because that was something that resonated afresh with me as well when we watched it in December. But I wanted to talk to you about the powerhouse that is Helen Mirren in this movie. Thoughts?
I mean, that would require me being able to formulate complete sentences, which I'm not always capable of doing when this particular subject comes up. Look, I think, I mean, she's a, I mean, national treasure is a horrible term, but she's unquestionably one of the with no qualification, she's one of the finest actors of her generation, right? Let's just start there with the obvious statement. Like, she's one of the all-time greats, and one of the all-time greats of British cinema in particular. And having a paired with Hoskins in this movie is fascinating, because all the stuff we've said about Hoskins' character, right, and how, in particular, how Hoskins plays the guy as this larger than life, but also how there are layers to that, and how it's clearly, it's clearly an affectation, at least in part, but it's also an affectation that's kind of gone so deep, maybe even he doesn't know where the separation is. Except you've got Helen Mirren's character, and she does know. And through her and the way she reacts to him when he's behaving in the various ways he behaves throughout the movie, we are given an insight into the true nature of the man. So that's just one of the things that she does in this film with her performance. And if you think about for a second about the sophistication that requires from an actor to be able to portray it in such a way that your reactions to one of the other characters give us the emotional skeleton key and the psychological skeleton key for that character. And think about how important that is for this movie, because Hoskins is the central character, and it's Hoskins' journey that we're following throughout it. And it's Harold's psychological disintegration we're observing. How well does that even work if we don't have Helen Mirren in there as her character, as his character's wife?
As Victoria, another royal name.
Yeah. Giving us those cues, giving us those clues, so that when he mouths off about having another Bloody Mary on the boat and the chef, her reactions make it clear that he's clowning around, he's joking, it doesn't matter. But at the same time, her reactions later on in the movie when things do start to come unstuck, let us know that things are coming unstuck, because it's not necessarily clear from Hoskins' bluster and persona that there are problems, but Mirren cues us in by how she's reacting to what's happening and to what Harold's doing and saying. She has this amazing, all of her scenes are amazing, but this amazing scene where she's in the restaurant with the mafia, and she's been sent in there to basically not fucking talk about what's going on, and to bullshit and to dissemble and to change the subject and to charm them. And my God, if anyone could do that, it's Helen Mirren's Victoria. And then she faces this absolutely heart-stopping moment where across the table, the lawyer for the mafia basically says, cut the shit or we're leaving. You have to tell, like, they know. And watch Mirren's face in that moment, because the amazing thing when you watch that performance is her face doesn't fucking move. It doesn't change. And yet you can see the gears turning somehow. And I don't know exactly how she does it. It might be body language. I'm not sure. Something must be changing. But you see Victoria sitting in that seat thinking, what do I have to do now? And in a very short number of seconds, she realizes she has to come clean. She makes the decision. She makes it without hesitation, without fear. And you realize that she's at least the equal and probably, let's face it, the superior to Harold in terms of her ability to not just survive, but to navigate this impossible situation where she's sitting at the dinner with the mafia while someone is attempting to blow up and murder her husband's gang, and she's trying to close the deal. Like, it's just, I love good screen acting. I love it. It's something that I always get a thrill from it. But I think, for me, Hoskins' essential performance in this movie is absolutely, the movie falls apart without it. It's one of the greats. But Mirren's performance is every bit the equal of Hoskins's. It's every bit as vital. It's every bit as important. The movie falls apart without it. She's an incredible linchpin. There's one other scene I will talk about relating to that. And again, because it's so fucking important. There's a moment when she's confessing to Harold that Victoria's saying, I had to tell them because they knew. And she's so fucking calm when she says it too. She's so calm, even though it's a major deal. And Harold loses his shit and kind of grabs her for a second and then throws her on the sofa. And it's an extraordinary moment because we've seen this scene in gangster movies before, right? You name checked The Sopranos earlier. Like, we know Tony's slapped Carmela at some point, right? We just know that is been a facet of that relationship at some point. It's one of the things that she's made an accommodation with, right? However uneasy, however, begrudgingly. It's fascinating to me because what she does in that moment is she just freezes and her face is covered with hair. You can't see her. And the first thing that's surprising about that scene, and this is a writing thing, is Hoskins' character immediately says, "What's wrong with me?" So you realize that whatever's just happened, it's not business as usual. This is a taboo busting moment, and Hoskins is realizing he's kind of fucked up. Harold is kind of realizing he's fucked up. But what's amazing then is when she finally does turn around, Victoria turns around, she's almost paralyzed with fear and she bursts into tears. And it's absolutely nothing to do with the fact that Harold's just grabbed her. It's because the fact of Harold grabbing her means he's not in control of the situation. And that means they might fucking die. And it's like in that moment, she becomes the emotional conduit for both of them. Because Harold can't do what she's doing, even though he must be feeling some version of it on some level. So she becomes like the emotional expression of both of their fear, both of their terror at this horrific situation that they find themselves in. And Mirren as Victoria, who has been in control for the entire movie and who in every other scene in the film, including when she's dealing with her husband who is soaked in blood from having just murdered one of his, longest friends and closest serving allies, is calm and in control. There is this one scene where she just fucking goes, and she completely goes. And it's incredible. It's exhilarating. It's chilling. It's upsetting. It's incredibly powerful. And it's just an extraordinary bit of cinema. And it's just one of the best to ever do it. Just doing one of the best things she's ever done. I mean, it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary.
It's really fascinating that the kind of character she is in it. Again, to go back to Sopranos, she isn't a Carmela. She's whatever they're both complicit in, she's equally complicit in it. She's his consigliere more than she's a Carmela figure. She's the Silvio. And actually, kind of unlike, I know it's one film, rather than a 86 part TV series, but it doesn't. Maybe a difference with Scorsese as well, as it doesn't really dwell on the sin that they're both steeped in, really, does it? It's sort of matter of fact about that. They're really nasty people, really, aren't they? They're nasty pieces of work, and she's come on board with it. One thing I hadn't caught when we watched it back in December, but caught on this rewatch, was she's the second Mrs. Shand. There's dialogue on the boat about how his mum's never really taken to her, how she's still into his first wife, whatever happened there. And he says he's been divorced 10 years. So he's like, give her a bit of time. It's only been
10 years.
I'd love to meet the first Mrs. Shand. I bet she was something. That's what the prequel could do.
It's Rebecca.
It kind of is. The Gothic again. James, I wanted to, because one thing that Kit didn't really talk about there was the class thing between her and Hoskins, because they talk about that explicitly as a kind of weapon of war when they're planning out the mafia meetings and what she does for him. I mean, do you want to speak to that a little bit in terms of her character?
It's such an important part of what their relationship is because of the access that she is able to get him. First to the Americans, but that she has been the primary force in taking Harold from one amongst many little chieftains to being king of all he domains, all the seas. So I think that I don't think that Harold is an unintelligent man at all. I think he's a very clever man, but one that we see unable to use the tools that he's honed throughout. I think that Victoria is a more traditionally educated, extremely well educated character who's able to think on her feet and who's able to strategize. And I think that the sharpening of a good mind through an excellent education, like she's enjoyed, is one reason why he and she are a success. I think also it's interesting to compare it with Scorsese. Because Scorsese, we've definitely seen this, even if David Chase didn't. Compare it to Henry Hill's wife, who is so passive. And they're of the same class, are Henry and Karen Hill. They're from the same place, if not the same, geographical spot or culturally, because Karen has the Jewish side. But I think that difference there's no sense of sin as a general rule in the upper classes of the UK. Look around and you'll understand that that's the case. Less so also the working classes. If there'd been a middle class person in between them, they'd have been racked by guilt for what they were doing. I remember reading something about the first time those classes kind of encountered each other was in the 1960s, when the old wall started to fall down. And they looked at each other and they were both like, yeah, we both hate the middle classes, but you and us, we know how to have a good time. And I think we see that as well when they're taking the piss out of each other at the start, the calm before the storm. And they're able to, she doesn't really push him, but you get the sense that she's very able to push him on any lines that she chooses to. But that sense of a lack of sin, I think that does come from both of their very different class backgrounds. Also, they're not Catholic, so you're not going to have that same type of American or Irish gangster film, because there's none of that Catholic stuff pushing down them, or even the Jewish thing.
Well, not Catholic. That's living life on easy mode. That's cheating. What do you think about the relationship? Either of you, really, or both of you? What do you think about the relationship between Victoria, that is, and Jeff, Harold's heir? Because I think that's really intriguing. Because there's the overt moment of flirtatious is putting it mildly, of the bit where he escorts her home, and they have the scene in the lift together. But I think even before that in the restaurant, there's a scene that, and on the boat as well, actually, there's an energy between them. He's younger and more conventionally handsome than her husband. He's charming. He's clever. He's bold, and but there's an idea that they can work together quite smoothly as well. She can trust him to do things and he'll take care of them, at least insofar as he's a trustworthy character at all. And clearly he fancies her a lot. And but there's a dynamic there, isn't there? I don't think, you do weigh in, but I don't think she's betraying Hoskins for him. But I think there's an energy there where she sees someone else she can work with here, not instead of, but alongside working with Harold.
I think they're both aware. Go ahead, Kit.
No, you go.
I was just going to say, I think they're both aware of that there being a positive semi-sexual energy that's there, in as much as is safe when you're dealing with a caged baboon, as Hoskins kind of is as a character. Yeah. He's a gorilla. He's a silverback who's just barely held in by his CNA suit. So in as much as is safe within that, they have that simpatico. And it's nice for her to have someone within that organisation that she can talk to. So she'll probably let him get a little bit closer to her as a human being than she would one of Harold's other men. I think it's completely in line with the betrayal that he goes on to do. That at that point, after that meal, he oversteps the mark because he's already begun to betray, and he's going to continue to go after what he's after. What's most interesting about that scene is her reaction, because I get a sense of her being uncertain of her own power there. It's a man who's very capable of violence. She'll be very aware of the terrible things that he's done for Harold and probably off his own back as well. So she's, after having had to basically do arms negotiation whilst juggling a drunken counsellor and also keeping the mafia from fucking off, she then has to go home and deal with more male bullshit and not have to be the frigid bitch and not have to go over to the whore side as well. So she still exists within this universe of misogyny. So the sexuality has to kind of be there a little bit in order to achieve her own goals. But it's really interesting that it's not something that she overtly says to Harold either. So there's still, it seems, a link between them that she honours separate from her relationship with Harold.
Yeah, I'll turn to you in a sec, Kit, but like that's another thing where it feels like we're coming in at the end of a story here, doesn't it? Like, if that was The Sopranos, it'd be a whole season arc, where Jeff is like slowly getting a bit too big for his boots and getting a bit more confident. And I'm thinking like Carmela and Fiorio, that kind of thing, where it's building up, that kind of thing. But I think it's one of the great unanswered questions of the movie and the narrative as well, is what would have happened if she wasn't saved by the bell? Like what in the lift in that moment, what is her response there. You know, even if they just go up another 2 floors in that elevator without the bell dinging and her escape, you know, like because I don't think it's not even necessarily that she's cornered, although she kind of is in that moment, you know, physically. And obviously a lot of women will be aware, you know, of the kind of the nastier side of that kind of situation. But I'm not sure she was going to turn that down. You know, if she wasn't kind of startled out, you know, like she's, you know, she's a flawed human person as well, you know, and it's kind of, you know, there's a lot going on. Kit, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I want to pick up on that because I mean, I loved your reading of it, James, and I think it's completely valid. I don't know if what I'm going to say would speak against it or maybe just adds more layers. It could go that way, I guess. I felt that in the scene before that in the car, she did kind of, I thought she was kind of very gently flirting with him a little bit. I don't think it was overt, and I don't think it was anything certainly that wasn't plausibly deniable. But I also feel like there were a couple of the lines that she gives in there. Because my thing about it was I was thinking about what you were saying earlier, David, about them having been married for 10 years. And I was thinking about what Harold might have looked like 10 years ago and where he was socially at that point and where he was. And I was thinking about how she is clearly upper class, right? I mean, clearly she exaggerates perhaps her upper class background, or she's being asked to with the gangsters, but it's still there. And I was thinking about what you were saying, James, about how in a way she's this kind of, it's almost to me like she will have been a social bridge between Harold's kind of nouveau riche of questionable origin and the blue blood old money, right? And in particular, of course, where that intersects, which is the City of London banking institutions, which Harold will have had to negotiate or will have to navigate in some form in order to get the Docklands project running, right? And you know, the point about, like, I mean, it, you know, the movie in no way makes this explicit, but one could infer that, you know, if one was prepared to put in a little bit of intellectual legwork, you know, one of the things the movie might be saying is there isn't a great deal of the difference between the gangsters who work in the big banks in the City of London and wield pens and the gangsters on the street who wield machetes, in terms of the devastating impact they can have. But I think the idea that Mirren's character is that bridge is very attractive to me. But then you have to ask yourself the question at that point, if that is the role that she has served and continues to serve, what's in it for her, right? And I think she is clearly still attracted to Harold. The two are clearly still in love with each other in some way, or enjoy each other in some way. Presumably there's a physical dimension to that. Also, though, clearly perhaps not as much as they did 10 years ago. And I wonder if part of what's going on in those scenes, it feels to me, is that she is seeing in the younger man, she's seeing that younger Harold that she was first attracted to. And it's fascinating that this moment happens again as Harold is on the cusp of crossing over from being a gangster to the biggest gangster in the city, maybe, or certainly in South London, to being a respected businessman. He's about to cross that line with her help, and it was her plan. And it's almost like she's running a kind of weird ass reverse My Fair Lady on Harold. Maybe he was her project, right? But then suddenly, as she's about to achieve it, is part of her thinking, yeah, but why did I like this guy in the first place? She does strike me as a woman who is attracted to danger and dangerous men. She'd almost have to be, because with her background and her class upbringing and all that, why shack up with a gangster? Now, I'm sure 10 years ago, Harold was a very charming man, but she's a very, very, very bright woman. So charm alone won't have been enough. I think she was attracted to him because he was a gangster. I think she loved the idea of being a gangster's wife, and then somehow the project of making him respectable. I think that appealed to her sense of vanity, a sense of intellect, and a sense of gamesmanship, if you like. Like, can I do this? Can I pull this off? And now at the moment when it's all about to be achieved, and then crucially, the moment when it's all about to be achieved, or it might all fall apart, right? Because this is straight after the meal. So she's at the state of maximum flux where all of her work of the last decade is teetering right on the brink. Here is this young man who is so much like that Harold of 10 years ago that she fell for.
That's really interesting. And I want to go up to what James said about tragedy, you know, because you've got the the sort of incestuous nature of this as well. The fact that she's sort of the stepmother in a sense, and Jeff is the adopted son, an heir, and there's a weird kind of Oedipal thing going on there, and if you really want to get into the Greek tragedy bit, Harold killing Jeff, sort of seals his own doom, or works that way narratively anyway, I want to, there's two other things we'll get into more thoughts about, Victoria's stuff, I think, as we go, especially as we go to the ending. There were two little things I wanted to talk to you guys about in terms of, I guess, first, like queerness in the movie, and second in terms of race. I think it's a point we get to both, but I just wanted to do the queerness first. So Colin, Harold's friend, Harold's friend, sound like I'm lampshading already. We didn't even mention Kit. People have heard me and Kit talk about the House of Cards trilogy before. This is the actor who plays Makepeace in the final cut. Yeah. Also looking young, also looking pretty good. He's not quite Brosnan, but he's looking good in the swimming pool scenes.
Very good for his age, for certain. Yeah.
Don't get a lot of his character, because he's killed off early on in the film. But you hear about him. You hear about you referenced his the National Service shared past. It's arguable that Harold's. It's funny the way they talk about him as being a queer man operating in these circles, isn't it? Because it's kind of it's known, it's accepted. But going back to the Sopranos, that's not always the case that queer people can operate in those circles and be known. But it's sort of implied that Harold has protected him, possibly, has certainly done more than tolerate him, but has also been edging him out of the organization. Jeff is an heir who. The reason for him needing an heir almost is that Colin's on the out. And it's the more I talk about this, I was ridiculing the idea of prequelitis, essentially. There's so many interesting things about the setup for this movie, aren't there? There's so many interesting things that we don't really get to know about, like what's been going on with Harold and Colin in the last 10 years. That seems to have been souring slowly, doesn't it? Again, that would be a whole series of The Long Good Friday, the show, he's on the outs, but the sexuality thing as well, presumably Colin has been gay for his whole life, and when they were young men too. How long has Harold known that? What transpired between them during national service? Like what? I don't want to find queer, certainly not partnerships there where they aren't necessarily, but we just don't know a lot of this stuff. We are speculating about it, and the emotional depth of Harold's devastation when Colin's dead. He's one of his oldest friends, but was there more? I don't know. It's it's intriguing, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, it's really interesting to me, and like you say, the stuff that I love about this. By the way, just to put a shout out for movies that do this kind of thing, give you these rich backstories by inference in a line or two, and let you, the viewer, do all the work of piecing together what all of it means. One of the things that was fascinating to me were both the depth and limits of Harold's tolerance when it comes to this character, and what I mean by that is. Obviously, there is the bare fact of here is a apparently openly gay man who is a member of this gang in good standing, and not only that, but was the heir apparent apparently for quite a while, and Harold's right hand man. In that, again in that era, that would have been unusual for a man of Harold's background to do that, to choose to elevate someone in that position to the position he got elevated to. But there's also the fact that Harold has a very, unthinking, deep-seated homophobia when he says, he has that conversation. He says, well, do you think it's because he's, you know what gay men are like? He doesn't say gay men, but he says, what gay men are like when they kind of, they get really bitchy if they think they're being mistreated. You think he knew he was being squeezed, and it's kind of straight back into like the most basic stereotypes. You think, well, hang on, you've known this man like more than half your life, and you treat him as an equal in most respects, and yet when the chips are down, you can't help but revert to stereotype and ask yourself these really, you know what I mean? And it's just that's fascinating to me as an insight into Harold's character and psychology.
It's certainly homophobic, but I actually like the that line you're referring to, Kit, the sort of old queens getting bitchy kind of thing, is almost like an insider's insight. Like Harold seems to know a bit too much about this. You know what I mean? Like Harold's another aging queen, in one reading of it, who's just better at putting on the face, I guess.
Or is it that he has to portray this homophobia, this idiotic bigotry in front of the men, so as not to steer the horses?
Yeah, it's interesting. He definitely has a different. I know you want to come on to race in a second. He definitely delivers the line in a very different way to the way he delivers the overtly racist lines that he has in the movies, where there is real venom behind what he's saying, real kind of hatred bubbling just under the surface. Whereas that line isn't delivered in that way. It's very, very different. So yeah, mate, you might be onto something there, James. Maybe it is. Maybe he feels that's. Although by that scene, it's just him and Jeff, right? So he feels he's got to play that in front of Jeff.
Yeah,
maybe. And if so, that's interesting in and of itself. Like, what does that say about how he sees Jeff's relative power and the structure that he needs to perform in that? Yeah, that's really interesting.
Well, and it could be, as always with the people differences of opinion stuff, it could be that him and Colin have fallen out for very good, or or not good reasons over the last 10 years in the distance, and he's using his homosexuality as a sort of almost like a fig leaf and going, oh, it's because it's because you can't trust gay men, really, ultimately, whereas actually they have more substantial differences between them. Who knows? It's intriguing. In talking about the race stuff, we talked about the visit to Brixton already. That's really interesting, that scene. Both they're rocking up and sort of terrifying the local populace, and the whole scene in the informant's house, and then leaving the house. I wanted to bring up the we were talking before about the scene, again, is essentially the line that gets Jeff killed, is when he talks about Harold potentially being the shit on the IRA's shoe. Interesting, on this rewatch, I caught that on the way out in that scene, on the way out of Brixton, basically, you get Harold talking about, dog shit in the streets, and, about, and you actually, you cut to basically, these Black British people kind of leaving the houses and just going about their daily business at the same time. And, he's equating a subset of people in London, in the London of his changing times, with shit, basically, and then for it, just half an hour later in the narrative, for him, for the main threat, the thing he has to lash out about is the idea that he should be treated as shit, the idea that he would ever be seen as that way by the shifting plate tectonics of his world, that he would ever have that status. His racism's real, and it's stark, and it's really ugly, isn't it? And I love the way they don't, soft soap it whatsoever, to try and make him a more sympathetic character.
It is, and the thing is as well, he has gone to this area, and there's such a telling line as you drive past these beautiful looking, well kept houses, and he says something along the lines of, "It used to be a really nice area. It's still a nice area. It's just there's black people there now." You realise that he sees his city as changing from underneath him. Something has been changed, and there's a sense of the fact that money is changing things. The fact that at this time the government and local councils would have been cutting back things like body collection and litter picking up. And of course, like every racist, he's like, well, I'll blame the immigrants for that.
Yeah.
Everything that's going wrong within his world can have a simple scapegoat. And it's also a brilliant evocation of Brixton at that time as well. There's only a couple of times, and we'll get onto the score afterwards, I know, where we hear when we hear diegetic music. That's not part of the score, and both times it is West Indian music. It's reggae. We hear it after the security guard is more or less crucified upstairs in the warehouse, and also a little tiny bit around in Brixton. And it gives those scenes, and I think the characters that we see that live there, a warmth that lacks from the rest of the claustrophobic walls closing in with every passing scene sense of the film. Brixton looks like a wonderful place to spend time versus the fucking dying docklands in the background of every other scene.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you venture south of the river, you're going to be up for some intense experiences. We'll talk about, actually, just before we talk about the ending, I'll let Kit talk briefly about that meat hook scene as well. Because getting back to it's a horror thing. Let's talk about the score briefly, because I wanted to flag that, because it was when I was watching it with you gentlemen back in December that because the score was going around my head. I think it was before we watched it in December, I put the soundtrack, I knew what to talk to you guys about, and I got the soundtrack on Spotify, and I started listening to that intro, and I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. I forgot how good this was. But then I was thinking what it reminded me of, and this will be particularly pertinent when we come back to the mood of the outro, so to speak, But it's because I've been watching a lot of horror movies over the last few years in general, but catching up with a lot of classics as well. I've been watching quite a lot of Dario Argento, and I was like, what is this generically? I was like, it's fucking Giallo, it's a Giallo movie. This is like Suspiria, it's like you can imagine sort of the rain coming down the airport windows, and people like progressing through that Rome at night in cabs, and it's the like that's a horror movie score, isn't it? And then you've got the kind of brash saxophones and everything, which have got such a weird 80s sort of 70s 80s tone, because you've got kind of echoes of Baker Street in there as well, haven't you? That sort of exuberance of the city and everything, and it's such a weird blend. But it just worked really well for me. I don't know if you guys dug it as much as I did. I guess I've been listening to it a lot.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool. I mean, for me as well, it felt like a natural evolution of the sparseness of like the Halloween score. And it's just like, for me, again, that's to me speaks to the 80s-ness of it as a movie. Is the feeling of it's like, okay, but what if we do that, but we go full bore and we have other instruments, right? Rather than just that one, like that one piano or the piano with the underlying. And I think it's absolutely, I think it's fantastic. And again, like the rest of the movie, part of the reason it's so powerful is because it's so, it for me, it's so of its era, it's so of its moment, that it captures it captures that spirit and reflects it in the same way that the film does. And it means that it feels weirdly timeless at the same time as being like carbon dated to within 6 months of when it was recorded by the material, kind of, the instrumentation that you described and the sound of the production and all that stuff, which kind of, there's a pretty narrow window, I think, where something would ever sound like that, right? You know what I mean? But and partly because it's just a good bit of music on its own right. It's a really, it's an interesting bit of music. I think it holds up really well. And it just, I think what I love about it is when it comes crashing in, it really does a great job of underscoring the drama of whatever's going on the screen. I think it's used quite sparingly. But when it does come in, and I love the fact it does kind of crash in, it kind of kicks the door down when it comes in. It's like, right, you're having some fucking score now. Bam. And like, normally that winds me up in a movie. Generally speaking, I prefer not to notice the score. I prefer the score to be like the rhythm section in a rock and roll band. It's doing exactly what it needs to do, and therefore I don't even notice it's there. But actually, this movie is one of those rare exceptions where the score almost feels invasive, and I love it. I think it actually adds something materially powerful to the movie.
I remember in December pointing out to you guys that, it was partly because of it's not the very beginning of the movie, although the main, Long Good Friday theme, I guess, plays at the very start of the credits. But then it plays again when Hoskins is introduced, which is, a little bit more minutes into the movie than you might think. That's a weird structural thing. But then at the end as well, that what it was reminding me of is the role that 110th Street plays, across 110th Street plays in Jackie Brown. There's kind of little parallels there. And, we were saying in December, I'm sure Tarantino's seen it. James, you were talking about the sort of tautness of the score, being really effective in this because of the nature of the plot. Is that
Yeah, and I think also, I don't know if it was a budgetary decision or if it was an artistic choice, but this film would be a lot worse if it was played in an orchestra, if it had been composed and then played for a complete set of strings or whatever. The very limited synthesized sounds helps you feel Harold's mind throughout there. And it's never ever triumphant. And I think whenever there's an act of physical violence, it goes deathly silent. I don't recall there being a catchy hook occurring as someone gets stabbed with a glass or whatever. But when there's times of emotional turbulence, when Bob Hoskins' face is doing that fantastic display, half-veiled, of terror while he tries to seem in control of the situation, that's when it does that crashing in thing. But yeah, it does. It feels, from a production standpoint, and I mean from a musical production standpoint, as if it's occurring directly within your ear. And that's just what you need when you want to feel this sense of being confused and overwhelmed, which is, I think, kind of the leitmotifs in terms of emotion throughout this movie.
There's a bit I'm not sure they quite get away with where the score's very prominent, which I was watching again today, and I think we were kind of chuckling about it back in December as well, which is the bit right towards the end after Harold's killed Jeff, where he takes a shower, and the whole thing's done almost like a shampoo commercial, or like a music video. Whereas, but you're watching this, Hoskins, who's he's a pretty hunky dude in his own way, but like but he's not conventionally beautiful, and they're kind of like lavishing on it in the way that you would if, say, Helen Mirren was in that advert, and it's kind of, and they're playing like, a kind of erotic, almost kind of Garth Marenghi's Dark Place kind of cheesy score, and
it's so funny you say that though, because on a rewatch, that actually really jumped out at me as a moment I really loved. And the reason I loved it was because I mean, everything you said is correct, but for me, the thing you missed from that description, but intentionally or otherwise, is that's all true. And then the camera shoots in at a close up on the legs, and you see this blood running off him down the drain. And actually, and it's intercut, and this is brilliant, I think, intercut with but Victoria and Razor's burning the bloodstained suit. in the barbecue. And actually, for me, the second time through watching it, I mean, I agree with your observation. It was like a shampoo commercial. I think that was the point. I think it was meant to be like, for me, it was the collision of a kind of overtly consumerist advertising, kind of very 80s as well, advertising kind of approach with something actually really kind of, well, I was going to say biblical, something really nasty, something really kind of grounded and unpleasant. And the idea of it as like because it's not often a shower scene in a movie when it's not done for straight titillation is a moment of symbolic cleansing, but this is a moment of real cleansing. This is a genuine attempt to scrub away an actual fucking crime. This is an attempt to pretend that an act of murder has not just been committed.
Well, the animalistic way in which he's sort of supping at the water that's falling down onto him as well. It's almost like what you call it, Brett in Alien or something, just standing under the water. This kind of it adds the animalism of him. You are essentially watching a gorilla have a shower.
Well, this is it. I mean, James described him earlier as a silverback. That's dead on. I actually think of Kong in Skull Island, like scooping a fistful of water out of the lake. I mean, it really is. It's almost on that level. But yeah, and I think I mean, I agree with you that it's incongruous, but it is funny because for me on a second view, I was like, actually, this is really fucking good. I really like that,
Yeah. Well, you definitely. I like the phrase incongruous, by the way. When you just talk about Kong, the physicality of the scene just after Jeff's death as well, where he's wanting to go over Councillor Harris, who he now figures is has a hand in all this, and they basically have to hold him. The combined strength of it raises Vicky and one of the other henchmen. It's the guy. It's Terry from 40 Towers, isn't it? We didn't mention he's in this, they can only just about hold him back. And, Vicky basically almost has to like sandblast him with a fire extinguisher almost just to sort of snap him out of it, but there's something so animalistic about that. He's literally going to just kind of walk across London and kill this guy, it's.
She literally slaps the sense into him. And it's a great scene as well, because again, bear in mind her earlier breakdown, even in that scene, this one where she slaps him, she's completely in control.
Mm-hmm.
She can see that he's about to completely lose his shit, but she knows exactly what to do. And these amazing moments where she's just gripping his forearms and forcing him to make eye contact with her. They're so telling, and it's such a powerful, because he's fucking gone. He's completely gone, and she knows he's gone. And then when she says, "This is it. We've got him where we want him now. We can do this. We can actually. There is a way through." It's so fucking good.
It's very interesting as well that his cleansing, his to deal with the trauma and the death that at his hands of Jeff is he wants to go out and murder. And Vicky and the rest channel him into, we're going to go and murder. Just think it through a bit more.
Exactly,
it's still murder. They're not suggesting any other solution.
Yeah.
This is again a thing of them all being complicit, isn't it? And it's not that Victoria's the good character. They're like, no, we're going to murder people. Just wait, just wait a little bit.
Measure twice, murder once. Okay?
Yeah, exactly.
The thing is as well about that shower scene is a lot of films and a lot of creative people forget that tension needs to be released. You can't constantly build up and up and up and up because it makes for an unpleasant viewing situation. And of course, there are times when you want your film or your piece to be unpleasant, but also for the tension to hit, you can't be playing at 11 constantly through. So as a viewer, as he's in there, I'm really grateful for the opportunity just to go, oh, good, okay, let's all of us get our breath back now. And that's, I think, it helps us get ready for the last little part of the film. I think we need to re-energize ourselves. It's not a long film by any stretch of the imagination.
No,
it's very well paced, but so much has been happening in such a short amount of time. I think all of us need to, metaphorically get into the shower and just have a little bit of a breather before we go on for the final act.
It's a really good point, because actually narratively as well, that's actually it's the point in the movie where we finally understand what we've been watching for the last fucking hour and 15 or hour and 10 or whatever it is, right? He's just had the big revelation that puts it all into place. And you're absolutely right. As the audience, we need a moment to just be like, oh shit, that's what this is all about. And also, I think for me, certainly equally, oh shit, how the fuck are they gonna get out of this one? You know what I mean? Like, what is your way through at that point? And that's, I think you're right. I think that's really, because it's interesting you said about taking a breath. I mean, it is a moment where you take a breath, but it didn't, interestingly for me, I didn't find it particularly relieve tension. It was, for me, actually, there was a sense of building dread throughout it, because it was like, well, okay, but you're still like, you can wash this blood away, but you can't wash away what you've done or the situation you're in, actually. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? You're still completely fucked. Anyway.
Well, it's where it's in dialogue with previous gangster stuff as well, isn't it? Because they're basically building up to a Michael settles all the family debts and Godfather sequence at the stock car race, but it's one that doesn't solve anything. You know, we know we almoys skip straight to the end of Godfather 3 after that. You know, like it's kind of, it accelerates. I want to talk about the finale with you. Just before that, Kit, because I remember you were very struck by it in December when we watched it. The scene in the, the what do you call it, the abattoir, I guess. The storage room with the meat hooks, because that's quite a famous scene as well. Not up there with the ending, but famous. And you had quite a visceral reaction to that, didn't you?
It's really extraordinary, yeah. And actually, it ties in with something I wanted to say earlier as well, which is we talked about Brixton, but we didn't talk about the torture scene that happens in Brixton as well, or I referenced it briefly, but we didn't hit it full on. And I think they're two really, really important scenes in the movie. And actually, funnily enough, one of the reasons they're important, both of them are important narratively, is because they both underline the same thing, which is Harold doesn't have a fucking clue what's going on. So in the scene where they're torturing the kind of quote unquote supergrass, by the way, we haven't talked about the corrupt police officer yet either, but that fucking guy, oh my god, what a performance. But also the way oh god, yeah, just the worst, and the way he just gives the guy up too. I can't really do that. He's my biggest cross, and Harold's like, yeah, you can, and you will. I will throw enough money at you and you will do it.
Yeah, he's like, all right.
Actually, that comes back too, because he gets smacked around the face by Harold in the abattoir, right?
Yeah.
When the guy comes in, he's like, it's the because he's figured out the bomb. He's quite an important character. But
I think that's a preview of Harold confronting the Americans at the end. Actually, it's kind of like it's because it's like a moment of you think he kowtows to authority, and he does to a point, but then you find out who's really in charge.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunately what he's going to find out as well.
Yeah, spoilers, not him. But yeah, so that torture scene's, and it's really, like you say, James, I don't think there's any score in that, but the torture scene in Brixton is tough. I mean, I found that genuinely tough to watch because Razors is really, and not a lot of it's on camera either. It's most of it's implied violence. You see Razors move and it cuts away and you hear the guy screaming. But yeah, it's a really powerful scene. When I say the guy, Paul Barber, by the way, one of the great great British screen act, one of the really really important part of Only Fools and Horses, and various other things as well. Like but he's great in that scene, and it's another moment that really underlines Harold's racism. The fact that he's sleeping with a white woman when they come in, and the way Harold reacts to that. In all the worst ways you'd expect. But yeah, the abattoir sequence is incredible. And again, to set the scene, he sent out his entire gang with guns, by the way. They've raided the arsenal to do this, to go and bring in, I mean, it seems like the head of every other fucking gang in London, right? Or certainly in South London. No, it's North London as well, because there's a whole bit where he goes across, the guy says, what are you doing across the river? Is something
they're going up to Soho and stuff,
That's it, yeah. So they're literally like, every under gangster in London, whatever the hell you call it, every petty king in London, and then they're stringing them up by their fucking ankles and dragging them in. And it's just, the thing that really got me was the shot from the meat hooked gangster point of view. Suddenly you're upside down, and even the camera pans up so you can see your own shoes hanging off the hook. It's really disorienting. You don't see that kind of camera shot very often at all in cinema. It's a very, very horror movie shot. And again, the clanking of the chains, which is a sound effect that will always put the shits up me. You might think because of Hellraiser, but actually because of Temple of Doom, although Hellraiser 2 as well, obviously. But yeah, and of course, it is a fucking abattoir. This is a place where mammals are slaughtered from this position, as a matter of course. So there's nothing subtle going on here in terms of the symbology, right? But of course, the symbolism is really interesting because it's not, you think about that as a viewer and then you think, yeah, but also for the gangsters in this scene, it's not fucking symbolic either, because they're actually hanging from fucking meat hooks in a fucking abattoir, and Bob Hoskins is angry with them and they don't know why, and that's quite scary. So yeah, I just thought it was, and I really thought something kind of Scarface was going to happen. I really felt that Scarface dread moment of like, oh shit, here comes the chainsaw kind of thing. It's also interesting thematically. I've talked already about the fact that it's the scene where the police officer get punched. That's Harold crossing another line.
Yeah.
And a really important one in the narrative. But also Jeff's behavior, because he loses his shit and starts punching one of them in the stomach. And it feels out of character, but you're not sure why. And of course, it's actually a really crucial moment. He's desperate to get the attention away from himself and what's actually happened. he's desperate for one of these guys to freak out and confess, even though they didn't do it, just to, you know, move the attention off him. So that was,
You get that performing masculinity aspect as well. Then Jeff is
very
having
much
to
so.
amp it up as well. You know.
Yeah, very much so. And what I love is as well is that Hoskins, you know, lunatic that he is, immediately calls him on his bullshit too. He immediately drags him away. He's like, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" You know, like really, really interesting considering how out of control Harold is in a lot of the scenes in the movie and later on, obviously.
He's got a sense of decorum, hasn't he? He's got a sense of how he thinks things should go. And when they kind of slip away from his script, he gets very worried.
Well, yeah, he knows the point of that moment isn't to beat them up. Fundamentally, it's to scare the absolute piss out of them. And that if one of them's done it, then they'll talk. I mean, that's what he thinks is going to happen. And
the manager moment, that's what he's doing there. He's taking a young, you know, colleague aside. He's saying, "That's not how you deal with this right now. What's going on? Are you okay?"
Yeah, he's a responsible manager.
Yeah.
And how, complete with, okay, turns out none of them did it. Let's just give them all $1,000 each and send them home. The ultimate fucking manager buy-off, right?
Is that enough for these guys? I wonder.
Yeah.
Doesn't he say he's going to leave them in there for a bit though? Like, just get a bit cold, like, you know, because you kind of leave that room, don't you? They're not coming down necessarily soon, you know. True. But yeah, I want to go over that with you, Kit, just because I think it cues up the horror, particularly in terms of, like, you know, perspective, identifying perspectives and stuff of the camera with the finale. And I want to hear from you as well, James, but because you'd seen it before, and Kit, I think you were almost entirely ignorant of the ending, weren't you, Kit? Like, you know, coming in, which is good actually, because, you know, as I say, I was hoping to hear your thoughts on that, and I was really, even when we watched it back in December, I was like, you know, I really hope he's not been spoiled on this. I really hope he doesn't know that this is how the film ends, and luckily you didn't.
I had a great casting lady on this called Simone Reynolds. I said, I want this IRA guy to make a sort of an impact. And Simone Reynolds came up with the name of this young actor called Pierce Brosnan. And I said, well, who's he? You know, who's Pierce Brosnan?
This was my first film. My agent called me, said, I've got you 2 days, possibly 3 days work on a film called The Long Good Friday. Report to work next Tuesday, Morden swimming baths. I hadn't a clue what I was supposed to do. I hadn't read the script. They didn't send me the script. There was no dialogue. I didn't have to read for this part. John said, you play an IRA hitman. Got no lines, but you kill people. I said, I'm in. Great. And he said, this guy's gay, and you're picking him up, and you're gonna kill him. That was my job. Kill him. And the rest was for whatever I wanted to make it.
Hi.
I picked the guy up, and then there's like, you know, give him the old knifey. I got nothing to say, really, except that was my day at work at Morden Baths, and we did a good job killing Paul. I wish all parts were like this, actually.
Here, hold up, where's Victoria?
And sees Helen taken away.
Bob Hoskins gets whisked away. And then I show up in the front seat, popping up with the gun.
Pierce Brosnan, I never met him. He actually takes me off and kills me, but I never met him.
Welcome to the world of film. I showed up to shoot the sequence. Bob Hoskins wasn't there. Filmmaker was in the back with the camera and lights. John Mackenzie driving, and me giving my best smile of malevolence. But I was completely ignorant. I didn't realize that it was going to be such a cinematic moment.
And when
For me, as an actor of 25 years of age, it was brilliant. But I'm glad I made something with my career. Otherwise, you wouldn't be talking to me. I'd just still be the guy at the end of the movie.
What was your reaction to watching that for the first time and sort of processing it? I suppose by that I mean, you know, when Harold steps into the car.
I mean, we'll spend a lot of time, I suspect, talking about Hoskins and Brosnan, and rightly so. But I'm quite happy for maybe you two to lead on that a bit. For me, the shot, you will be completely unsurprised to hear, the shot that I still, it's not actually too strong a word to describe it as haunting, is the very quick, it's maybe a second and a half, 2 seconds at the most, the final shot of Helen Mirren as Victoria, because he says, "Where's Victoria?" He realizes that she's not sitting in the car, and then he turns around and she's behind glass in another car, and she's banging at the window, and she's scared, and she's been driven away, and it's there and gone, and there's a couple of things, I have a couple of reference points for why I find that so deep-seated and terrifying. One of them, okay, we're going deep on this one, kids. One of them is Dempsey and Makepeace. So when I was a kid, a friend of my father's wrote some of the Dempsey and Makepeace. I think he came up with the show, and I think he wrote some of the show. I know he wrote some of the show. I think he came up with the concept for the show. And his wife is an actress who, amongst other things, was on the very first ever West End performance of Grease with Richard Gere back in the whenever the hell that was. And one of the things that he decided to do was write an episode that would allow her to be in the show. And their son, who was a friend of mine, I won't name him, but so I got to watch this episode of Dempsey and Makepeace when I was maybe 10. And the thing about Dempsey and Makepeace is I haven't revisited it. I don't think you can get it on DVD at the moment. I have no idea if it's anything other than ridiculous at this point. But I do know for a 10-year-old, it was fantastically scary because I had no idea. I hadn't seen this kind of crime drama. I'd seen Sherlock Holmes, and I'd seen whatever the 80s version of Midsummer Murders was, probably Ruth Rendell. I'd never seen anything like this. I'd never seen anything of this kind of gritty, right? And that episode that has those two in, she basically, her son gets kidnapped. Her son, my friend, gets kidnapped. Now, obviously, I know her. I know him. I'm watching the show knowing they're both sitting next to me on the couch. It still scared the shit out of me because they grab him, they throw him in a car, and the last shot you see is him banging on the rear windscreen, screaming, "Mum, mum, mum," right? And I knew this kid. Now, it's weird because, I mean, thinking about it now, that was probably a longer Friday or March, actually. It was probably, they were probably riffing on Mirren's reaction shot because it certainly was a few years after that was made, and they will have seen it. But it's a real childhood thing because it's one of those moments where the kid who's screaming in the car is sitting right next to me, so there is no earthly reason why this should be scaring the shit out of me, but it absolutely scared the shit out of me because I recognized him and because in the moment he looked so scared. And it's just, I still haven't really unpicked that moment too much, or I haven't thought about it in a while, to be fair to me, but it hit me. And seeing Helen fucking Mirren, right, seeing Victoria in that moment, it's scarier. It goes back to that Stephen King thing, right, about how the reason novels will always be scary in the cinema is because as soon as you open the door in the cinema, and you have to open the door, and people see a 50-foot monster, they say, "Oh, thank Christ, I thought it was going to be a 100-foot monster," right? What that scene does for me, and bearing in mind, obviously, my feelings about Victoria as a character as well as Mirren as an actress, as an actor, is that the implied horror of what is going to happen next to Victoria and where my mind goes, and also at exactly the same time, the unknowableness of it. And on top of that, there is a layer of, for all that I'm not ever going to be a member of Harold's fan club, the knowledge that he is going to his doom, not just with whatever horrible thing is going to happen to him, but with that very same unknowability in his head. There's a level of horror to that I think is genuinely profound. And the only other thing I can compare it to is a shot I saw fairly recently in a show called For All Mankind, which is an Apple TV show about what if the Soviets landed on the moon first. And it's a fascinating show, and I'm really enjoying it. But it had a moment which gave me flashbacks to Moonraker, which is probably where I'm so scared about it from, where something goes wrong in space and an astronaut ends up spinning off into space. And I remember seeing that happen in Moonraker. And I remember absolute mortal terror at seeing it because it was simply one of the scariest things I could possibly imagine. Floating in a void, you have a certain amount of oxygen, you are dead already, and you have no control at all over your physicality, and you're just surrounded by the most hostile environment you can possibly imagine. And something about that, just, it's an existential dread. It's it's one of the few moments when I can look at Lovecraft and be like, yeah, you kind of, maybe you had a bit of a point about some of this shit, mate, because that is scary. And for me, those two feelings, those two thoughts, and again, I had this a few nights ago watching a moment in For All Mankind that gave me the absolute fucking screaming heebie-jeebies and real willies. For me, what happens to Victoria in that shot is the is the grounded kind of not space Earth version, but it's the same thing. She's going into the void now, and all we know is that she's never coming back. And what's going to happen there is absolutely terrifying. You know what else it is, of course, David, to throw back to her earlier story, it's the jaunt.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
She's
it's longer than you think.
She's about to take the jaunt, right? With her eyes open.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and it's, you know, it's that thing happening to a loved one, isn't it? But it's also the thing that they, you know, you were talking about the breakdown scene before that they have together. You know, they both feared this or something like it, or even if they haven't been able to articulate it, they've known something was coming or could come. But now it is happening. It's that realization, you know, that this nightmare has dawned. And you're right, the unknowability, you know, bad as it, not that anyone would ever want to make this kind of choice, but you know, as awful as it would be if she was, you know. You've written before, Kit, about the ending of Casino, you know, and the, know, the Joe Pesci, what happens to Joe Pesci at the end of that movie. That's bad. You know, a loved one being horribly killed and tortured in front of you before your own death is bad, but this is different and as bad. You know, like
at least
said, the unknowability.
I think it might be a more profound torture. Let's put it like that. I think it could be argued that it's a more profound psychological torture than seeing it even.
James, do you know, as someone who'd seen it before, but, you know, revisiting it, do you have any thoughts about, I guess, kind of like that ending, the way Hoskins is, you know, and Harold is, you know, processing it, and I guess about kind of Brosnan in that scene as well, you know, and I'll add any thoughts that you don't get to.
No, absolutely. I mean, the thing is, throughout this entire film, even when she's distracted by the possibility of Jeff, she and Harold are the foundation of this. Their relationship is such a source of strength for one another. And throughout the film, when things get bad, there's always the reassurance of at least they have each other. And to see them torn apart like that, that's the very heart of the film being torn apart before your very eyes. It is merciless, it's ruthless. And, you know, as much as I'd like to kid myself that the section they're out of Harold's eye shot, she turns around and says, "Great job, lads, and let's move on." I don't think that's what happens. But it is the case that once we get away from her, we get that fantastic, iconic. It don't matter how many times I've seen this, to watch Hoskins' face go through literally every emotion in front of your very eyes as we watch him put everything together. It's one of my favourite moments of cinema ever, and I've got a lot of them. And that juxtaposed with the wry smile of the young Pierce Brosnan in the front as he holds the gun almost coquettishly in front of him. It's the reason why we love films, isn't it? Something like this.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think that is one thing I love about it, actually, is that you get all Hoskins, you know, perhaps even overanalyzed reactions there, you know, all the realization and the frustration and the seething anger and the fear, and, you know, the fears for Victoria and you know, the feeling of his own futility and helplessness and captivity. I guess we were talking about it as a back, you know, you get all that, and then it cuts back to Brosnan and he smiles. It just as if to go, yep. All that, yes, and then you get a bit more Hoskins, and just the way it's choreographed as well, you know, with the city lights, you know, and the way that the score comes to that thudding end right at the start, right at the end, you know, it just cuts, and you're like, that's all you get to know now, you know. It's that unknowability again, just hitting you like a sledgehammer, you know. It's
that's a great point as well, David, because we're seeing the London that he's fought so hard for, but in black through the cage that he's been placed in. Everything has been for his own view as a British patriot and the future that's coming. And now his entire world has shrunk from that metropolis, the edge of something new and exciting. Whatever your moral thinking of what the 80s were going to bring, things are about to change, and he could have been at the centre of that. And all of a sudden, his world just shrinks down, and it's very close to his face to emphasise just how much his world has shrunk to.
Yeah, he's saying goodbye to the city, I suppose.
As well. Yeah.
Well, and also on top of all that, and I mean the utter indifference of the city.
Yeah.
Turns out he wasn't important. Turns out no one's going to miss him. Turns out nothing's going to change. All the shit's still going to happen. It's just someone else is going to build it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if the mafia don't want the city, the Germans will have it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know,
that's what we say.
I mean, in real life, right? The Brinksmack boys will do it. They'll turn their stolen Brinksmack gold. It'll be those gangsters instead. They'll launder it through, you know, they'll launder it through Jersey, and it will be used to invest in Docklands. I mean, that's what actually happened. You know, Because capital's completely indifferent to the people involved. The people don't matter at all. It's a machine, you know. Yeah, I think it is extraordinary. I think, yeah, I mean, obviously I talked about the bit I wanted to talk about, but of course, Hoskins, oh my God. I mean, it's wonderful. I mean, we joked about it, didn't we? Like, what does the script say? I really do want to get my hands on it at some point. It's like, what does the script say at that
Harold
point?
thinks for a bit.
Do you know what I mean? Like, over to you, Bob. I don't know. I mean, the part it's worth bearing in mind. Like, the part was written for him. You know, he was the first choice. But yeah, it is one of those moments in cinema that you look at. And again, I mean, I think probably it's worth saying this as well. Like, on paper, it shouldn't fucking work. I mean, that's why I make the joke about the script, because actually on paper, it shouldn't work. On paper, it's kind of fucking ridiculous, really. What the last 45 seconds of your movie is a two-shot between two facial expressions with this insane score. Like what the fuck are you talking about? But it works because you've got two world-class actors, because Brosnan is fucking fantastic. And I know, David, you want to talk about him more a bit in general throughout the movie. I mean, what is he in, like? Is he in 2 scenes or is it 3?
Well, he's in the scene at the start where he's the sort of, you know, honey trap essentially for Colin in the swimming pool, and then I think he's just in the end bit as well. So you're barely reminded that he's there, and I love the way he's a bookend, you know, because although the IRA in general are portrayed as somewhat otherworldly and, you know, elemental, as I say, he is their angel of death. You know, and I do love that coquettishness, and I do love his charm in that scene, which I think is probably what you're about to speak to there, Kit. But like, I love the fact that you talk about the, you know, the sort of inevitability of this, you know, like the sort of sweep of it, you know, of unavoidability that comes in at the end here. And I just love the idea that, you know, the reason it's so profound is we're all, not to be too pretentious about it, but, you know, we are all going to face that moment. Oh, you know, like we're all clever planners. We all have our things going on. We all have our journeys that we're trying to take and our like little lives that we're trying to improve and stuff. But essentially one day we get in the car and he turns around, and that's what we're faced with, whether it's, you know, a sudden prognosis or, you know, a slow inevitability. You know, like, we're all going to be in that moment, and we're all going to make those grimaces, and we're all going to just see him grinning back at us. You know, really, ultimately, it's terrifying.
Yeah, I'm reminded of Hank Williams' song "Angel of Death" in the great Book of John. You're told of the day when your body must lie beneath the cold clay, and it goes on in that way. And absolutely, Brosnan as the personification of the Grim Reaper is very, very wise indeed. Just to bounce off before we continue to talk about Brosnan, Kit talked about the part being written for Hoskins, and the very idea of someone else in that role simply hadn't occurred to me. It didn't seem possible that someone else could have been cast there, because it is the perfect meeting of actor and material, as is Helen Mirren as Victoria.
Yeah, I can't think what other British actor would work in that role. Richard Bryars, maybe.
You know what? My brain went immediately to David Jason, and I want to shoot my brain making that suggestion, because that would have been You see, that would have been one of the all-time worst scenes in cinema history. 45 seconds of David Jason gurning in the back of a cab.
Well, the fact that you know, Harold would sound a bit like Count Duckula would kind of would charge the whole thing a little bit differently. I wanted to say, actually, I'll probably drop this earlier in the episode, but I just realized that one thing I'd missed observing is we didn't really talk about Harold's big speech on the boat. That you know, he does literally while they're going under Tower Bridge or preparing to go to Tower Bridge. And I was thinking in that moment, you know, because there's all that stuff about, you know, economic revival and about being a Londoner and about being a proud Londoner and taking it forward into the future and partnership with the common market and all that stuff. Basil Fawlty echoes, you know, we're in it now and I'm going to make it work. But he's more of a kind of, well, Thatcherite in terms of, you know, the early Thatcher, you know, in terms of, you know, flying the EU flag, well, the EEC flag and all that stuff. But I was thinking just in that moment, you know, you talk about respectability and, you know, this, you know, wanting to be Governor Corleone, Senator Corleone, you know, all that stuff. I was thinking Harold, because this would be the GLC days, you know, Harold would make a great mayor of London. You know, like when you think about, you know, what Sadiq Khan and his predecessors do, their whole job and how they see themselves and how they project themselves and stuff, to varying degrees of success is it's about investment, isn't it? It's about portraying London as this big idea and about getting the money in, basically about flying the flag and doing the boat trips and welcoming the dignitaries and welcoming the Americans and whoever else might want to buy up parts of London. That's kind of the whole job, is the showroom salesman. And I was just thinking, like, that's another kind of what if, isn't it? Like Harold could, like, 20 years later, he could be the mayor of London. Like he's quite good at this, really.
I mean, it's why the gig appealed so much to Jeffrey Archer, right? And why he was so determined to try and get it done, even though it was clearly not going to happen. I mean, that's just made me think, maybe I wonder if Victoria is some kind of relative of Archer's. That might actually explain a few things.
We're getting dangerously close to working this into the Urquhart verse.
Yeah, well, I think it could.
I knew we were going to link them up somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Archer introduces Harold Sham to Urquhart at a party.
Yeah.
Urquhart would eat him alive. He would have no bloody chance.
No, that's true.
Anyway, I want to get kind of any final thoughts off you guys, because I want to mercifully let you go in a little bit. But is there anything that we haven't talked about the Long Good Friday that you wanted to bring up, or have you got any final thoughts on it in general, I guess?
I mean, I'm really fascinated by the European politics side of it. I'm really fascinated by the fact that, I mean, it's just, that's just a happenstance, right? But one of the things that makes it a very strange experience watching this in 2024 is it's a film made at the very birth of what we were calling then the European project or the European experiment. And, watching it in an era after Britain has, for whatever length of time, decided to leave that same project. What's fascinating is looking at Harold's persona and his expressions and that speech and the speech he gives at the end about the mafia and the Germans, and realizing, as much as that is in the moment, it's a pro-European stance that he's taking. Everything he says and everything he is completely compatible with the Brexit mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really, really interesting, because to me, it's about how fundamentally it's about how a certain mindset is almost infinitely malleable, as long as you use the right language to intersect with it and the right coding to intersect with it. So that someone who in 1980 would stand on that boat and make that speech and be completely sincere, for whatever sincerity meant, would also on that same boat, on that same River Thames in 2016 be saying, we've got to get out.
Yeah.
We must regain our sovereignty. We must regain our freedom.
Well, because it's about dominance, right? Because they talk about wanting to make London the capital of Europe. It's not really the language of cooperation, really, is it? It's the language of barging into the fucking China shop and being the biggest bull in it,
Yeah, that's right. And that's where, and I also love the complete kind of intellectual coherence of it, because then it's like, but well, then why are you pitching to the Americans? Why aren't you doing what you say you're going to do at the end of the movie? Why aren't you doing that now? If this is a big, and of course it's because he doesn't have any values. He doesn't have any principles beyond making a buck. So this is expedient to say today. So he says it and maybe even believes it today. Tomorrow he'll say something completely different and believe it equally fervently, because tomorrow he realizes that's where the money's going to be made. So yeah, I just found that side of it. I mean, it is, I found it on balance melancholic. I'm not an uncritical supporter of the European Union or anything like it. And there were and are significant issues with it as a bureaucratic organization and as a organization of international banking concerns on a bad day. But when I say that, by the way, I want to be clear, I don't actually mean Jewish people. I mean an international banking consortium. I just want to be very, very clear. I'm using those words in
all the clarifications,
dictionary meanings, and not in any other way. But for all of that, it's kind of hard to argue that the working class people of the country I live in aren't in a worse state, partly as a result of that disastrous vote, and that, the removal of some of the protections that we had, and just the damage it's done to our economy and is continuing to do to our economy, and what that's meant for people. And I think, yeah, it's quite extraordinary. It's quite extraordinary to watch it and see, someone in the first blush of that Thatcherite moment, and someone who is a fairly unreconstructed Thatcherite in all the ways that means, that kind of economic model, also the racism, and think like, yeah, and you would have been, if you carried on, you would have been absolutely sitting there with Nigel Farage in 2016 on the barge saying, we got to get out.
Yeah, well, maybe the limo ride was a mercy then.
Except
James,
there's always someone else to do it. That's the trouble.
That's true, yeah. James, final thoughts from yourself about The Long Good Friday?
It's a film that's about power obtained, power threatened, and power methodically taken. Like so many of these political stories or gangsterisms or stories of business, they're all about these little warring enclaves. And I think it's absolutely amazing that there's a film that has so much of this going on in such a short period of time. It leaves me nostalgic for a period that never was, because you didn't have 100 Long Good Fridays in 1980. You never will. It's a classic, I think, of cinema and of literature, actually.
Yeah.
I think it's a story that can and might last forever just because of the quality there. You mentioned earlier, David, about it being a Greek tragedy, and I think that this could last like a copy of Euripides for another 2,000 years. It really does have those universal human concerns at its heart, and there's realistic human beings ticking through and behaving in ways that are recognisable to us. And through some of the best actors, screen actors there's ever been, we're shown the expressions change as the cogs turn in their heads. And for its legacy to have been for a little while to be the film that inspired Snatch, and I like Snatch as well, I think it's a funny and entertaining film, is an absolute portion of critical understanding. Because, yeah, if you want to talk about classic film, this is what this is.
Yeah.
Couldn't have put it better myself. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining me, and I'm really glad I got to talk to you both, and both together, actually, specifically about The Long Good Friday. I really appreciated both your insights and input, and I really enjoyed rewatching it with you. Would you like to tell people where they can find you and your work and all that kind of thing, Kit?
Yeah, sure. I'm still hanging on by the skin of my fingernails to Twitter at Kit Gonzo, although and I'm not calling it X. You can bury me and I'll still never call it X. I don't know how much longer I'll be there, but I'm there at the moment. I'm also on Bluesky under the same handle. Probably more likely to find me there in the longer term. If you are interested in hearing more podcasts from me, Watching Robocop with Kit Power is the name of the feed. But increasing on there, I'm putting out other works not related to Watching Robocop, although there are several episodes of that there as well. I also podcast with George Daniel Lee over on his YouTube channel, which is Exaggerated Elegy, Strange Playground, something like that. You'll find it if you put those in. We do a series called What the Hell is Wrong with Us, kind of similar to this, where we talk about movies mainly, although sometimes also books that fucked us up as children. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, check that out. All of my non-fiction work is the vast majority is published on Ginger Nuts of Horror, including the My Life in Horror series, which we referenced earlier. It's come to an end, but the archive's up there on the website. I also have books. So if you're interested in reading my fiction or non-fiction in book format, head over to Amazon and then put in the words Kit Power under books. Otherwise, you're just going to get solutions for charging your phone. And then you'll find all of my books are on there. And you can buy paperbacks or, what are they called? Ebooks. What are they calling them this week? Are they still calling them ebooks? I'm so old. It doesn't matter. Anyway, if you want to buy the Kindle books, buy them from Amazon. If you want to buy the paperbacks, maybe get the ISBN and go to your local bookshop if you've still got one, or even order them through your library. That would be awesome. And yeah, My Life in Horrors Volume 1 and 2 are the non-fiction books, along with a book I wrote about the movie Tommy, fiction tomes. Oh, there's all kinds of stuff. Novel God Bomb, recent novellas, The Finite, and A Song for the End. And one coming up that I've recently finished writing, but won't be out yet, but might be by the time you've heard this, called Millionaire's Day. So if that's out, go and grab that because it will desperately need attention. Thank you.
And he didn't even take a breath, I can confirm. And you can also find that podcast that we referenced before where Kit talks a little bit about My Life in Horror Volume 2 from over a year ago on this feed as well, alongside many other recordings. James, what have you been up to?
So I'm not really on Twitter anymore, but if you do want to see me retweet podcasts I'm doing, you can go to at James LATR Murphy. I'm on Bluesky, jamesmurphy.bsky.social. And I do a number of podcasts. The main one is a little thing I'm doing with Kit Power called We Learn More more from a 3-minute record than we ever learned at school, where currently we're going through the Bruce Springsteen discography, but we've got plans to expand that to other rock and roll discographies. It's to be a very exciting project. Sticking with the musical side of things, I keep myself up to date with the amazing Holly Boson, who's something genius. We do a podcast called Pop Could Never Save Us, where we talk about the charts. That's excellent as well. If you go to patreon.com/Jim Slater, you'll find a lot of my written stuff, and the solo novel I've been working on is getting into a shape where it's in a position to be shared. So get on there, drop me as little as $1 a month, and you'll get a lot of good stuff, really good stuff.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, James. And thanks, both of you. And I encourage people to check out your work wherever they can and whenever they can. Thanks for helping revive the EscapeGoat podcast into 2024 as well. It's always nice to warm up again, and hope people will be hearing this, well, for the first time at least, on Good Friday 2024. And we may have another Easter surprise for you as well. So thanks, guys. Say bye-bye.
Bye all. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
And that's bye-bye from me as well. See ya. You've been listening to the EscapeGoat podcast, hosted by David Fagiani. If you want to contact the podcast with any feedback or thoughts, you can leave comments on our Libsyn page or under our YouTube videos, or email us at escapegoatpod@gmail.com. You can also reach the show on Twitter on @egoat_pod and follow us for new episode notifications. This podcast is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as our Libsyn site, escapegoatpodcast.libsyn.com. Original intro, outro, and any other incidental music for this podcast is composed, produced, and made available by permission of Richard Gilbert.